Chapter 12:27. The magnificent and magnificent palace still retained its flashy but impractical decorations. These buildings still looked very tough. Even if a certain luminous object jumped on them, it would not cause any adverse effects. It did not collapse a second time, or 3 times, or countless times plus one collapse. It seemed that other than those fancy decorations, the strength of these buildings was still quite good. After being hit by an avalanche of millions of tons, they did not collapse instantly. Instead, they stood firm for hundreds of thousands of years. Their strength could be seen at a glance. Under the leadership of Qing Lei, Yun Nuoxing and the others were like a group of small ants entering the city of the giant dragon. They walked on the road that was already covered in snow and bent by the ice and snow. They passed through the main city gate that was hundreds of meters high. They passed through the palace that was smashed in front and behind. They kept going deeper and deeper. Adventure. Well, adventure. Yun Nuoxing took a deep breath. He definitely did not see the big guy's little brothers knocking the bricks there. He did not see it. It must be an illusion. I can't knock it down. The broken pieces are too big. Qing Lei put down the knife in her hand and could not help but mutter. It was exactly what she said just now. They were going to the heart of the snowy mountain. Who would have thought that they would find such a big thing halfway? Now they did not have any tools in hand. The building fragments in front of them were too sturdy. They could not dig out a piece even if they wanted to. Yun Nuoxing lifted his bangs and slapped his forehead. He could not help but ask, "What are you doing?" "Knock a brick and bring it back. It can be used as evidence that this place has seen the light of day again. There are no relics of the lost clan left behind now. Those have all turned to dust in time. So, as long as you bring a brick back, it can prove that you have found a dust-covered lost relic." Yun Nuoxing muttered in his heart. He did not say anything. He just followed Qing Lei and the others deep into the lost city. There were many exaggerated and gorgeous sculptures in the city, but they were not used to commemorate or worship anything. It seemed that making them look exaggerated was just a habit. It was a habit to make everything look beautiful and perfect. There was no symbolic meaning or even any meaning. It was just a decoration purely used to dress up. He could not decipher it. It was true. He understood the meaning of these 4 words. He could not decipher it. Throughout his 10 or so eras, dozens of eras of life, his footprints were all over the void. Perhaps it was also all over the great Yuan realm. He had visited and observed countless worlds. The information of countless worlds was recorded in the Book of Epochs. Then, a kind of information that he could not decipher or understand at all suddenly appeared. He did not even know if it was complete or not. Only God knew what he had seen in the 20 minutes he had been here. Some of the corners of the ruins, some of the patterns, some of the special decorations, the arrangement of the buildings, and many other things could be inferred from these corners. But from the moment he came in, he had only received a lot of messy information that could not be connected. The existence of this lost ancient city seemed to be purely for the sake of existence. "Big sister, what are you thinking about?" Qing Lei noticed that Yun Nuoxing seemed to be in a dilemma. He had a pensive look on his face. He frowned from time to time and looked like he was about to collapse. She could not help but move closer to him curiously. She seemed to have guessed what he was thinking about. "Are you analyzing this lost city?" Don't waste your brain. Many scholars have done this since ancient times, but in the end they did not get anything. If you want to forcefully decipher something, you need to fill in a little bit of information with your brain. However, you can only get a series of scattered information fragments that cannot be integrated. Isn't this too baffling? Yun Nuoxing frowned. Logically speaking, this lost city should have some patterns. However, he could only see one of them, so he could not tell. There were so many records from ancient times. If all of them were to be put together, there should be something in common. There should be something in common. It was just, maybe, it's just baffling. Qing Lei put her hands behind her back. She did not knock on the bricks anymore. She just followed beside him and said softly, "The things left behind by the lost clan are used to force people to their death. Many scholars have gathered all the lost ruins that were discovered tens of thousands of years ago and carried out countless years of research. In the end, it was just a waste of effort." "Isn't this just a prank?" Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes. "Even so, there are still many people rushing to find the lost ruins? Or will there be many people coming to find out what's going on? At the very least, they will come out to take a look." That's right. We just happened to be in the first batch of people. If we received the news later, Big Guy and I would still postpone our plans at that time and travel thousands of miles to take a look. Many people are like that. As long as they receive news about the lost ruins, they would come to take a look no matter the cost. Qing Lei nodded. She rolled her eyes and laughed. Then, they will look at a pile of meaningless brick. After taking a few detours, Yun Nuoshing finally gave up his unrealistic guess. In fact, whether he had a guess or not was another matter. In the past 10 minutes, he only felt that there was a lot of meaningless information that urgently needed to be processed in his mind. At first, he racked his brain, but later, he gave up thinking. Maybe it was just like what Qing Lei and the others said, there was nothing left behind in the lost ruins. It was just a huge ice sculpture. He felt that this explanation made sense. As for what the ancient city sculpture was used for, "Boss, big sister, there's something here." About a street away, the big guy's underling roared, causing Qing Lei and Yun Nuoshing to raise their head. They looked at each other and hurriedly rushed in the direction of the sound. Yun Nuoshing also temporarily dropped the idea that had just popped up. He raised his hand to grab the little angel that was bouncing on the side and clamped her in his armpit before running away. A minute later, they surrounded a big hole and looked down. It was still surrounded by snow. It was a big hole buried in the snow. It should be part of a building. It was about 100 meters wide, and they couldn't see how deep it was. It was a very straight shaft. The walls of the shaft were also engraved with many prosperous and meaningless patterns and sculptures that appeared in the ancient city. Their only purpose seemed to be to make the walls of the shaft uneven. Yun Nuoshing looked up and looked around. It was very empty, like a square was deliberately used to place a big well. However, there were some marks on the ground around it. It seemed like it was used to place something heavy on the ground. He looked around again, focusing on the direction of the avalanche. After a while, he found what he was looking for. Then, he put the pieces together in his mind. There should be a tower here. Yun Nuoshing gestured with his hands and pointed to the marks on the ground. The ground around here should be the supporting part of the tower. If that's the case, the part buried in the ground should also be part of the tower. The upper and lower parts are separated by the ground. "Wow, big sister, you restored it so quickly!" Qing Lei exclaimed. Her eyes were filled with admiration. Yun Nuoshing grinned unnaturally when he saw this. "A tower that separates the upper and lower parts? What's that for?" Big Guy scratched his head. "This is probably near the west side of the ancient city." "No, this is the center of the ancient city." Yun Nuoshing shook his head and pointed further away. "The place further west has been destroyed. An avalanche back then completely destroyed the higher west side. Now, there are still some scattered building fragments under the snow that have not been dug out. Most of the fragments and buildings in the entire west side of the city have been knocked to the ground or sent to the east side of the city. The center of the ancient city. That should be a very important building." Big Guy's eyes flashed. The buildings in the center of Juguang City are the headquarters of the explorers. There is a light condensing board on the top of the tower that was modified by a conjurer. It is used to absorb the light of Wei Su. That's why it's called Juguang City. There is such a thing. Yun Nuoshing was a little surprised. That light condensing board absorbs so much light. What is it used for? To recharge some of the curses in Juguang City? For example, the curses in the city, such as the cursed lamp, needed to be powered by energy. Ordinary people could not mobilize energy. Only extraordinaries, or some extraordinaries, could control it. So, he immediately thought of that use. But that use seemed a little too simple? The big guy and Qing Lei looked at each other. Their eyes were a little solemn. The latter said softly, "The gathered energy is stored under the ground of Juguang City. Even if an extraordinaire wants to sense it, it won't be easy. As for that piece of light congealing board, other than the use you mentioned, it is also a weapon." Yun Nuoshing and the little angel were stunned. Weapon? There were no traces of battle in this world. They did not think that there would be any enemies in this seemingly peaceful world that would require such a level of city defense weapon to deal with. Even if there was an army of undead beasts, there was no need to use such a level of weapon. But this function seems to have been abolished. Qing Lei said something that made Yun Nuoshing dumbfounded. Seeing Yun Nuoshing's startled expression, Qing Lei couldn't help but smile bitterly. "I heard it from my teacher. Originally, Juguang City was designed according to weapons. It was probably because there was some threat or use in the distant past. Now that the world is peaceful, this weapon is useless." Yun Nuoshing looked at Qing Lei with a strange look, then looked at Big Guy and said, "He is a very magical scholar." She waved her hand and changed the topic back to the topic at hand. "So, what do you think this tower in the center has a special purpose?" In fact, 60% of the current city is built according to the layout of the buildings in the lost ancient city. This kind of important building in the center is the style of the Lost Clan. Yun Nuoshing grinned. She did not expect there to be such a relationship. Qing Lei had been staring at the bottom half of the tower. It was dark and she could barely see the uneven marks on the wall of the well that was 10 meters deep. She could not see the bottom at all. "Big Guy, we did not bring the corresponding tools." "Nonsense, we are going to climb the snow mountain. At first, we did not expect this kind of accident." Big Guy shook his head helplessly. "We can only give up. Let other guys work together to take a look. We can't go back to get the curse rope for a while." Yun Nuoshing glanced at him. "It is not an ordinary rope? This shaft is too deep. Normal ropes won't be enough." "Speaking of normal ropes, we have some in our backpack as well. Spell ropes can extend all the way until they run out of energy. They're much tougher than normal ropes." "Oh," Yun Nuoshing said. He stood on a circle of stairs on the protruding ground of the lower part of the tower and looked down. He could see the bottom of the tower, but for some reason it was very blurry. Logically speaking, the darkness should not obstruct his vision. This made him very curious about the shaft. Moreover, he could feel a weak energy lingering in the shaft. It was weak energy that had not dissipated in time. "Big sister, let's go. There is nothing to see. We can't go down to take a look. Let's hurry up and check out other places. We only have an hour left," Qing Lei said as she pulled Yun Nuoshing's arm. "Who told you that there is no way to go down?" Yun Nuoshing smiled. Qing Lei and the others were stunned. A few seconds later, they subconsciously fixed their eyes on the little angel. Then, they let out a long "oh" in their hearts. "Come down with me. Big Guy, you guys stay here and wait," Yun Nuoshing said as he looked at Qing Lei and then at the big guy. Qing Lei twisted her body reluctantly. She seemed to be unwilling. She had crawled and crawled all over the place, but to suddenly have her fly, she felt that it was too dangerous. "Can I not go?" Yun Nuoshing and the little angel looked at each other. Yun Nuoshing took the lead and carried Qing Lei before she could react. At this moment, Qing Lei finally reacted. She screamed so loudly that her snow mountain was about to collapse. "Wah! I don't want to die. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of heights. Big sister, I haven't been in love and I haven't been filial to my teacher. Let me go. Don't. Save me." Without saying a word, Yun Nuoshing jumped into the well. The little angel also spread her wings and turned into a ray of light to catch up. Only the big guy and the others were left with cold sweat on their faces. Qing Lei's screams gradually faded away with the echoes in their ears. Everyone looked at each other. Their cold sweat was about to turn into ice in this world of ice and snow. Boss, big sister flew down. Will she be okay? The big guy wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and laughed dryly. Don't ask me. I don't know. Yun Nuoxing's ears were filled with the sound of the wind and Qing Lei's screams. The screams were so scary that it sounded like a chicken being killed. Especially when the little angel hugged him from behind and the sound of the wind suddenly stopped, the screams were even scarier. It was especially scary in this dark shaft where there was no light. Okay, stop screaming. Focus and look around. Yun Nuoxing said helplessly. Huh. Only now did Qing Lei feel that the sense of weightlessness had disappeared. She didn't feel the excruciating pain on her body either. After hesitating for a few seconds, she carefully squinted her eyes. Then, she saw a pair of huge white wings with spots of light dispersing the nearby darkness. They illuminated the exaggerated carvings on the walls of the shaft clearly. Qing Lei looked at the pair of wings with envy. After a while, she looked at Yun Nuoxing and said, Big sister, do you all jump down when you see these kinds of underground buildings and shafts? Yun Nuoxing carefully thought about the few similar situations that she was most familiar with. She found that it was almost the same. She nodded and said, Seems like it. Qing Lei. Okay. I'm afraid we won't be able to hide from deep shafts for the rest of our lives. By the way, how deep is this place? The little angel raised his head. At this moment, he was slowly descending with the two of them. The shining hole above them was only a small dot of light. They were already very deep into this place. Do you often have this kind of encounter? Qing Lei was a little scared when she heard that. She estimated that she might faint if she jumped down again. A tower buried underground. It's possible that energy is injected deep into the ground to store it. It's normal for it to be very deep. Back then, this shaft had a lot of energy flowing through it. Moreover, it's a tower that's divided into two parts. If my teacher is right, the bottom part may be 2,000 to 3,000 meters deep. What's down there? Yun Nuoxing asked casually. I don't know. Maybe it's some energy crystals that have become empty shells. Maybe it's some energy residue. Maybe it's some lost relics? Qing Lei looked down and felt that she was going to fall at any time. She couldn't help but shrink her body. Only then did she realize that the way she was being held was a little strange. However, when she saw Yun Nuoxing's thoughtful and serious look, she didn't say anything. There are no dead beasts in these places? Yun Nuoxing suddenly thought of a problem. There are dead beasts all over the snow. Only then did I realize that there are no such things in this lost ancient city. This is also a strange phenomenon. The dead beasts won't go near the lost ancient city. If you're careful enough, you might be able to find the hidden ancient city by following the activity of the dead beasts. In history, there was an expedition team that used this method and spent 2 years to find a lost ancient city. Qing Lei recalled what she heard before and said, You can't find the specific reason? Well, my teacher guessed that there's a relatively large amount of residual energy in the ancient city that hasn't dissipated. However, my teacher is not a very powerful extraordinary. There's no way to know that. As for the energy concentration, Yun Nuoxing shook his head. There is indeed residual energy in this ancient city, but it's buried very deep underground. The center point is where we are now, but it's very weak. It's so weak that even I can't sense it if it's not gathered together. Then, I don't know. Qing Lei shrugged. The little angel brought the two of them down at a slightly faster speed. However, for safety reasons, they did not suddenly descend to the bottom of the shaft. She looked around and looked at the flashy decorations on the walls of the shaft with interest. If this was really a passageway for storing energy, Why would they use such complicated decorative patterns that looked fancy but had no practical use? However, these things did not seem to have any special use. There was no energy, and there were no signs of any special modification. Perhaps the Lost Clan was so bored that they would do these things in the shaft. At first, the walls of the shaft were still intact. However, as they got closer to the bottom, they saw some signs of damage. It was as if something had burst open the walls. Yun Nuoshing recognized the signs of damage, and could not help but frown. The internal energy had burst open the walls of the shaft. This is the sign of an energy explosion. Isn't this just a normal passageway for storing energy? She frowned too. Maybe not. Yun Nuoshing looked around with a serious face. With his eyesight, he could easily see the walls of the shaft. He saw many holes that had been blasted open by the energy explosion. Under the exaggerated decorations there was a layer of gray crystals that looked like glass. Those look like energy crystals without any energy. An entire shaft filled with energy crystals. She took a deep breath. This is not an energy passageway, right? According to this arrangement, this method. Why do I feel that this looks like something from your friend's side? That friend? Oh, now that you mention it, I remember. It looks like. Yun Nuoshing grinned. Navira's side. This can't be a huge energy weapon, right? Chapter 12:28. Lining the walls of the shaft were some energy crystals that had already lost their energy. It was not hard to imagine that they were once filled with energy. Of course, a shaft that consumed such a large amount of energy could not simply be used to store energy. According to this structure, this shape, and the remaining weak energy at the bottom of the shaft, Yun Nuoshing felt that he could assert that this was a weapon, an energy cannon. Oh, it was not the kind of cannon that some ancient countries used. It was a weapon that condensed and compressed pure energy, and then launched a focused attack. He heard Navila talking about it. Although he did not understand it very well, he thought that it was similar to a cannon. The only difference was that the cannonballs were replaced with endless pure energy. Perhaps it would hit a little further, and it would be more destructive. Moreover, it would make a lot of noise when it was hit, condensing all the pure energy together without any processing and firing it casually. It's all very low-level weapons. They're huge, cumbersome, and can't be moved. They're more like cannons mounted on fortresses, the kind that can be destroyed with a precise shot from afar. They're not very valuable. Buddy, if you're interested, I'll introduce a few weapons to you. Look at this one. It's used to strike with the concept of rules. It can dig out a piece of light from an entire world with a light press. You don't like it? How about this one? It uses the power of the void as its core and several types of high-level energy as its power source. That's right, it's a sword. It's specially made for a human sword like you. Why is your face so dark? You don't like it? Calm down. Impulsiveness is the greatest sin of the gods. Calm down if you have something to say. Whoa. Thinking about it, Yun Nuoshing's face was full of black lines. He shook his head fiercely. Why did he think of that guy at this time? Speaking of which, he said that it was fine. Originally, he was taking him to visit his armory. As he looked at it, he introduced it with the tone of a profiteer. Although he was not selling it to him, and he could casually take away a lot of it if he wanted, he did not know how to use those things. Looking at them, it was just strange. Yun Nuoshing's mind seemed to have drifted a little too far. He quickly got rid of those irrelevant thoughts. Anyway, he just wanted to express that he seemed to know the shaft that they were descending into. If he was not mistaken, it should be the huge and cumbersome Longsong cannon that was fixed on the fortress. Based on the structure, the furnishings, and especially the meaningless patterns on the walls of the shaft, he felt that there was an 80% chance that those meaningless patterns were actually similar to the patterns and charms on their magic circles. They looked gorgeous, and outsiders would not be able to understand them no matter how they looked at them. At this moment, He was standing here looking at other people's weapons. If he had never seen them before, he was just an outsider. In this way, the strange patterns and meaningless messages all over the lost ancient city could be understood. Those things might be similar to charms, concentrating the energy of the entire ancient city on this Longsong cannon. It was the opposite of Juguang City. Juguang City gathered the light and spread the energy throughout the entire city. The lost ancient city gathered all the energy in the center and then shot it out. But this cannon was a little too big, wasn't it? Using a city spanning about 1,000 miles as the base, and a cannon with a width of more than 100 meters. When it was shot out, it would be spectacular, gorgeous, and exciting, right? At this time, Yun Nuoshing suddenly understood what the art Navira had been emphasizing to him was. A world full of fireworks, a world full of explosions, a world full of… Wasn't it just setting off fireworks? He knew how to do that too. With a boom, he could set off the entire world as fireworks. That scene was so exciting that it felt like the beginning of the world. Oh, he digressed again. Why did he suddenly want to set off fireworks? Look at how beautiful this world is. The sky is full of stars, the starry sky is boundless, the moon is bright, the stars are sparse, and the scenery is beautiful. It is really a very good time to watch fireworks or set off fireworks. Perhaps the big movements in his mind were too frightening, or perhaps it was because he hadn't organized a firework party for a long time. In short, his thoughts were revealed through his expression. He even succeeded in causing the temperature of the air to drop by a few degrees, causing Qing Lei and the little angel to shiver from the cold. What terrible things did you think of? What an evil smile! She couldn't help but murmur. Her wings were shivering so much that they almost cramped. No. Yun Nuoshing grinned. Fireworks? Qing Lei was dumbfounded, but the little angel reacted. She was speechless. She hugged Hao Ren's hand and gently pinched his stomach. What the hell are you thinking? Why did you think of this? Rumble. A muffled sound came from the bottom of the well. Something seemed to have happened at the bottom of the well. The original sound could no longer be identified. The only thing that could be heard was the echo of it splashing against the wall of the well. After a long period of transmission, it turned into a strange and low muffled sound. It sounded like a storm, where the wind was squeezing through the window and thunder was rumbling outside. These two sounds were a mixture of the two sounds. The sound originated from a very far place. When it reached Yun Nuoshing and the others' ears, it was no longer the same as before. The rumbling sound was getting louder and louder, as if a brilliant explosion was rapidly approaching. And there was really a wave of air surging up from below, carrying the smell of hundreds of thousands of years of decay and stuffy heat. There was also a mouthful of dust, which choked the three of them and made them squint their eyes. The little angel quickly flapped her wings and imitated the holy light to disperse the dust blowing in their faces. Qing Lei had an allergic reaction and wanted to jump up. She subconsciously touched the knife, but when she thought of her current appearance, she obediently shrank back. She looked around nervously and could only see a small amount of old dust being blown up by a hot wind. Did you guys hear that? What is that sound? Yes. Well, as long as you are a normal person, you can hear it. Yun Nuoshing nodded. Looking at the movement and listening to the sound, maybe something at the bottom of this Longsong cannon has collapsed. Maybe it is a wall or something else. The collapsed building has rolled up a gust of wind, and there is only one or two one-way passages, so the wind is gushing out. Oh, big sister, you are still thinking very fast. What is a Longsong cannon? Qing Lei nodded and was stunned. The three words sounded very unsettling. Yun Nuoshing pointed downwards with her hand that was supporting her leg and said, "This is the shaft we are in. The walls of the shaft are filled with energy crystals that have lost their energy. According to the structure of the upper and lower parts of the shaft, there is an 80% chance that this is a pure energy weapon. If it could still be used, it could fire a cannon from the sky to the ground, and the land within a few thousand miles would be scorched. Qing Lei's face turned pale instantly. This thing, it can't be used anymore, right? Maybe it can't be used anymore. No, it has been covered in dust for so many years. It has been buried under the ice for hundreds of thousands of years. It can't be used anymore. Yun Nuoxing wanted to ask Navilla to come over and fix it. Perhaps it could be used. Although he wasn't in this era, it didn't matter. Even if he rolled up his sleeves and pretended to be very good at arranging things, he could still pretend to make it work. However, when he saw the little girl's face that was as white as snow, he decided not to scare her. Qing Lei heaved a heavy sigh of relief. Just like that, the three of them continued to descend along with the dust wind. She muttered to herself for a moment and couldn't help but say, "Speaking of which, in the past, those lost ancient ruins and lost ancient cities all had a similar arrangement. In the center, or in a certain direction, there was a very large and seemingly very powerful object. Could it be that those were the same as the one we saw? Are they special objects?" Yun Nuoxing nodded. According to the strange decorations engraved on the wall of this shaft, it is very similar to the decorations in the lost cities. If I am not wrong, it is actually a kind of extraordinaire used to guide energy, store energy, or do something with energy. Spells, just like the spells engraved on scrolls. The energy channel used by Juguang City to guide the energy of the entire city. It is such a kind of existence. Oh, I understand. Qing Lei scratched her head. But big sister, can spells be engraved on scrolls? Yun Nuoxing shrunk his neck. This time it was really bad. He wanted to talk about magic circles, charms, runes, and so on. But there was no such thing in this world. He could only make up some things that felt appropriate and tried his best to explain. In fact, he did not know if this world had the technology to engrave spells on scrolls. Just as he was racking his brains to think of a way to dodge the question, Qing Lei turned her head and saw his slightly troubled expression. She immediately filled in the blanks in her mind. I know. This must be a topic about extraordinaires that I don't know about. Teacher once said that it's difficult for ordinary people to guess the topics between extraordinaires because they speak in their common language, and other people can't understand them. Big sis, this must be what you're talking about. Yun Nuoxing quivered. That's right. This is the ancient technology. Now, there are very few people who can do this. It is probably the ancient information passed down from ancient times. My part. Qing Lei nodded her head in realization. There is no end to this nonsense. The little angel sighed in her heart and shook her head grumpily. She flapped her wings and fell down as if she had lost her strength. Her speed was getting faster and faster. Just when Qing Lei felt that something was wrong, she flapped her wings again and hovered in the air again. At this moment, they had successfully reached the bottom of the shaft. At the bottom of the shaft, they thought that they would see more complicated runes and charms. But in fact, there were some strange mechanical devices at the bottom of the shaft that were accumulating dust. There were 3 rings, which became smaller and smaller from top to bottom. Behind the smallest ring was a ball-like object. Of course, they had stopped working. The snow and ice that were sealed by dust had melted into a puddle on the ground. The walls of the shaft were also wet. The ground at the bottom was also covered in a circle of patterns, and the parts closer to the bottom were more tattered. This was the big hole that Yun Nuoxing and the others saw on the walls of the shaft when they were descending. What was exposed inside the walls of the shaft were a lot of energy crystals that had lost their energy. And there was, Yun Nuoxing raised his head. Right below him was a huge passageway. It was a horizontal passageway like those crisscrossing water pipes. Suddenly, one of them was inserted horizontally into the shaft. It was a regular circular passageway, which was also more than 100 meters high. He looked at the passageway, then raised his head to look at the shaft. After a moment of silence, He imagined a huge energy beam shooting out from the horizontal passageway and then rushing towards the shaft. He was afraid that it would pierce through the shaft. As he thought about it, he noticed the weird thing with 1 sphere and 3 rings. This mechanical device occupied the entire bottom of the shaft and was tilted at an acute angle to the horizontal shaft and the shaft. It was probably like a mirror refracting light. The huge energy beam shot out from the horizontal shaft, hit the device with 1 sphere and 3 rings, and then refracted and rushed out of the shaft. The energy in the beam was constantly superimposed and compressed, becoming more and more destructive. The excessive energy caused the energy crystals in the shaft to riot, and some of them were ignited and detonated. It was probably a long-song cannon. But why did it have to make a bend in the ground? From here, we can probably see the energy source of this huge weapon. Such a huge fixed long-song cannon should have an energy source, Yun Nuoshing said, pointing to the horizontal shaft. Huh? The energy source. Isn't it the lost ancient city above? Qing Lei was stunned. She followed Hao Ren's gaze. It was dark underground, and she could not see her fingers in front of her. Only the light from the little angel could illuminate the surroundings, but it could not illuminate very far. However, she could still see a huge, round object in front of her. Yun Nuoshing thought for a moment and told her about the refraction of energy and light. This is probably the only possibility. Otherwise, there is no way to explain the function of the horizontal shaft and the sphere and 3 rings. Big sister knows a lot. Qing Lei sighed habitually. Then, she flicked her long hair. Are we going to go over like this? Or should we drag the big guy down with us? Before Yun Nuoshing could say anything, the little angel trembled violently and shook her head. We can't carry them. We can't carry them. The big guy is too heavy. There are a lot of people. Yun Nuoshing knew that she was being lazy, but she did not expose her. This time, it did not matter whether there were a lot of people or not. That's right. It's fine if there are 2 of us, but we can't carry more people. Qing Lei was silent for a moment and nodded. If that's the case, let's go ahead first. I'm also curious about where this place will lead us. After saying that, Qing Lei jumped down from Yun Nuoshing's arms. Her feet stepped on the dust and snow on the ground that had not completely dissipated. Then, she took the lead and walked towards the horizontal shaft at the bottom of the shaft. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel looked at each other and shrugged helplessly. Then, they followed behind her unhurriedly. There was an invisible barrier at the cross-section between the shaft and the horizontal shaft. It might be used to prevent energy from flowing backward. However, that small barrier was not a problem for Yun Nuoshing at all. When Qing Lei was about to reach the cross-section, he took a few steps forward and bumped into it with his face. He smashed a huge hole in the fragile barrier with his head. The whole process was done quietly. No one would know what happened if no one said anything. Qing Lei only saw that he suddenly took 2 steps faster and then stumbled forward as if his feet had brushed against something. She did not feel anything unusual at all. By the way, is this barrier still working? The little angel knew what he was doing. She could not help but say in his mind, I thought everything had fallen into eternal slumber. To be specific, that's right. But do you remember what I said just now? There's still residual energy gathered at the bottom of the shaft. It's probably the last time it was used, and the residual energy was deposited at the bottom of the shaft. Then, it was stored through those things that look like charms, runes, and energy crystals. At the same time, it's also used for the barrier function. This thing's energy consumption is very low. According to the scale of this weapon, it's actually not difficult for a little bit of residual energy to keep it hanging for hundreds of thousands of years, Yun Nuoshing replied. After entering the horizontal shaft, what he saw was still the same thing. There were fancy runes and runes. In terms of scale, this was probably the largest weapon he had ever seen other than the one from Navira. After knowing the purpose of those runes, it was not difficult to distinguish and analyze them. Yun Nuashing deduced for a while and deduced that the energy gathered by this huge weapon was more exaggerated than the radius of a few thousand miles that he had just mentioned. The energy that burst out from the shaft and went through the top half of the tower for a second or even a few times, the energy that burst out was comparable to the power of a post-divine. However, when he thought about how powerful the life forms in the last quarter might be, this was not surprising. The entire shaft and horizontal shaft did not have a fork or a small door for people to enter. This made Yun Nuashing even more convinced that this was a huge weapon. When it was last used, it must have gathered more energy than it could bear. Otherwise, there would not be such a huge crack on the wall of the shaft. Especially since those cracks were from the inside, there were no signs of second damage. Therefore, it might have been over after one overload explosion. After that, it might not be used anymore, or it might have been buried under the ground by the avalanche. Speaking of which, what was the Lost Clan thinking? Why did they set up such a huge cannon next to the snowy mountain? They were probably worried that the cannon would not collapse the mountain. Just by the size of this big thing, one could tell that it would cause a huge commotion when it was used. The three of them were not slow at all. Soon, they had covered a long distance. However, their path was blocked by a pile of rubble. The huge rubble penetrated the ceiling of the horizontal shaft and fell down. They could see the part of the ceiling where the rubble was connected to the soil. Looking at this part, Qing Lei felt a headache coming on. She had a feeling that a secret was about to be revealed but was being held back. If they moved this pile of rubble away, it might cause a second collapse. Besides, they could not move such a huge pile of rubble. Boom! Then, Yun Nuashing smashed all the rubble in front of her into powder with a slap. She even froze the ceiling. Her actions were so smooth that Qing Lei's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This is the first time I've seen someone act so recklessly. She could not help but complain. Even if she was an extraordinaire, this was probably beyond the scope of an extraordinaire. Looking at the whole world, there was no extraordinaire who could withstand the psychological pressure to do such a thing. Calm down, calm down. There's no need to be agitated. The little angel smiled and waved her hand. It's just a normal operation. You haven't seen it yet when he acts more recklessly. Well, it's child's play to scare you so much that you're spitting your tongue out. Of course, there was nothing that a guy who could sacrifice the realm of the gods and blow it up could not do. The collapsed rubble disappeared, and there was still a horizontal well behind them. However, it was a little different now. With the ceiling that was now frozen as the dividing line, many rays of light could be seen swimming in the passage on the other side of the ice block. They were like small golden lightning bolts that kept jumping. Those golden lightning bolts came from all directions, from all kinds of wounds of various sizes. There were also weak energy remnants. These should be part of the weak energy that Yun Nua planet had sensed earlier and gathered together. We can't go through here. Qing Lei was depressed when she saw the large and small golden lightning bolts. Exposed to this level of energy, even an extraordinaire would not be able to withstand it for long. The amount of residual energy is too much. She shook her head helplessly. Big sister, even you can't do anything about it. Let's see if there's any other way around here. Wait a minute, don't tell me you're thinking of going straight through. Before she could finish her sentence, she saw Yun Nuashing and the little angel walking past as if they did not see anything. Every time they walked a distance, the jumping golden lightning bolts would dim, as if the energy was being sucked away. Qing Lei was speechless. This time, she could not help but be shocked. Even the ancient information passed down could not explain this. Now that she thought about it, the act of digging out the lost ancient city was enough to scare all the scholars to death. She was just overwhelmed by the discovery of this epic tier item and did not pay attention for a while. Now that she thought about it, she had a nagging feeling that she had missed out on something terrifying. In any case, The thing that she had just thought of was something that could not be accomplished even if hundreds of extraordinaires were to gather their powers. She could not help but gulp at the thought of it. Big sister, are you really just an extraordinaire? Yun Nuoshing stopped and looked back with a bewitching smile. What do you think? Anyway, they were just passers-by. If they did not gain anything from this trip, they could only retreat. He did not care what the life in this world thought of him. He shook his head. Don't worry, you'll be fine as long as you follow us. That's not what I meant. Forget it, it's useless to say so much. Anyway, I don't know much about extraordinaires. Maybe there really are extraordinaires in this world who have this kind of power. Qing Lei sighed and said the first half of the sentence. The second half of the sentence was just muttered in her heart. After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and said, All right, anyway, I'll go with big sister. Hee, don't drag me into the pit. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel looked at each other and shrugged. It's nothing. Chapter 12:29. Walking in a place full of chaotic and expired energy was a very exciting thing. She did not know if the golden lightning around her would suddenly go berserk, or if it would suddenly explode with some kind of destructive power and hit her head or something. She only saw Yun Nuoshing and the little angel walking in this somewhat dilapidated passage, strolling leisurely. As the two of them approached, the flashing golden lightning around them constantly extinguished, as if the flames had encountered a constantly spreading cold air and gradually extinguished. As for herself, she did not have such good self-control. After all, walking in this place looked abnormally dangerous. Her heart was about to break through the limit, and her rapid breathing made her nose and chest feel a little stuffy and numb. She looked around nervously, and her footsteps were almost imprinted on the place Yun Nuoshing and the others had walked, for fear that a small wrong step would cause some kind of energy explosion. She nervously wiped the sweat on her forehead. A few meters away, the golden lightning suddenly crackled, scaring Qing Lei half out of her wit. She hurriedly moved closer to Yun Nuoshing and the others. You don't have to be so nervous. Yun Nuoshing stopped and looked back at the little girl who was so frightened that she almost threw herself on his back. He shook his head helplessly and stretched out his hand to grab her arm without any explanation. As he walked forward, he said, If you are really worried, try to stay as close to us as possible. Beside us is the safest place. This sentence made Qing Lei feel a little safer. The person walking in front of her did give her a sense of security, especially when she thought about what he had done in the past 1 or 2 hours. If she ignored the many illogical and unreasonable phenomena, the scene was not only strange but also very reassuring. It was as if a powerful bodyguard who could overturn the whole world suddenly appeared beside her. The structure of the shaft at the bottom was basically the same as the horizontal shaft. There were runes and charms all over the shaft wall that were used to guide energy, and there were energy crystals hidden under the shaft wall. The only difference was the latter. The energy crystals here were not grayish-white and lusterless. Instead, they contained energy and a faint golden color. The wall made of energy crystals was also damaged in some places because the wall had existed for too long and aged. It could no longer restrain the energy, and caused a small explosion inside the wall. There were some small holes in the shaft wall that could be seen now. The energy that had not been blown up in one go was leaking out from those holes, forming golden energy lightning. The longest lightning bolt was a little more than a meter, and the shortest one was only the length of a finger. However, even this little bit of energy was enough to seriously injure an ordinary person. This was also the reason why Qing Lei walked in fear. Perhaps in her opinion, this dark tunnel with flashing golden lightning was similar to the road to hell. To be fair, no normal person would walk into such a tunnel filled with dangerous energy. If they did not understand the relationship between the two, they would only think it was a fluke. After a short walk, they would shudder and run for their lives. Qing Lei did not know how the golden lightning formed and why it disappeared. She only felt that it might have something to do with the two in front of her. Originally, as an experienced explorer, she should not continue to walk on such an unreasonable thing as normal. However, the two did give her a sense of security and indirectly gave her a lot of courage. Only then did she muster up the courage to follow them deeper. Qing Lei had a strange feeling in her heart. This might be a rare opportunity. If she timidly suggested to turn back now, they might really turn back. But then, she might miss something. Anyway, she braced herself and followed them down. When she passed through a gap in the shaft wall, she glanced inside and saw that the energy crystals below were still glowing with a faint golden color, flowing slowly like water. This was a sign that the energy had not disappeared. In other words, it was not that the energy had disappeared, but the golden lightning had disappeared into thin air. Perhaps it was suppressed by something. If we keep walking along here, where do you think we will end up? Yun Nuoshing suddenly said. Her voice echoed faintly in the hollow well, and Qing Lei came back to her senses. She subconsciously looked up at the sky, but she could not help but smile bitterly. Underground, the sun, the moon, and the stars were indistinguishable. When she was pulled down, she was only concerned with screaming. She could not tell the direction at all, and did not know which direction they were going. I don't know. It's too hard to tell the direction underground. But I won't be surprised where we end up. Yun Nuoshing thought for a moment and identified the direction. He would not get lost just because they were underground. At this moment, he was constantly releasing his soul to the surroundings. He could clearly identify where they were at the moment. Now, they should be heading towards the center of the snow-capped mountains. Thinking of this, he could not help but show a strange smile. If we go to the heart of the snow-capped mountains like this, Qing Lei seriously thought about the situation and said, I think I will pass out. The heart of the snow-capped mountains, huh? Yun Nuoshing suddenly said in a lazy and strange tone. Since ancient times there have been so many legends, so many generations of life, including the powerful life of the previous generation. How could no one have explored the details of that place? Qing Lei was stunned for a moment. She lowered her head and thought for a moment. Then she said, Maybe we didn't encounter a good opportunity? When the legends were passed down, it was already called the Sacred Mountain. Generations of people came here as if they were on a pilgrimage, but they did not mention that it was a sacred place that could not be set foot in. They even left a detailed map, but only the center was blurred out. Such ingenuity, so deliberate, really makes people wonder if they actually know something. For example, they know what exists in the center of the snow-capped mountains. It's just that it can't be passed down, so they hid it. Yun Nuoshing's footsteps slowed down slightly. He looked at the surrounding walls of the well and said, Think about it. Look at this huge horizontal well. It was once a weapon of war. The damage was caused by energy overload. It must have been used before, maybe more than once or twice. It was left behind by the lost clan and buried deep under the snow-capped mountains. How could they not know the details of the snow-capped mountains? Or did they actually know something and deliberately built this huge weapon in the snow-capped mountains? Tilting his head to look at Qing Lei, who was deep in thought, Yun Nuoshing stopped talking. He was just bored out of his mind. Walking in this place, he was going to fall asleep if he did not say something. Besides, he still had something to say. According to Qing Lei, almost every ancient city had the same layout. Could it be that every buried ancient city was a huge weapon? Weapons that were spread all over the world, but there were no traces of war at all. There were no huge scars. Even the scars and traces caused by the natural activities of the world itself did not exist. How should he put it? It was a little too beautiful and too monotonous. On a planet there are hundreds of different species. The living environment that they need exists perfectly on this planet. The big clans have the largest living space, and the small clans live in seclusion in every corner. Even if they leave those environments for a short period of time, they will not be affected at all. The most incredible thing is that they coexist so peacefully. The last generation of life had built so many weapons, but there is no trace of war to be found. Yun Nuashing said to the little angel in his soul, "Don't you think that the coexistence of these few phenomena is a little too fake?" It immediately continued his words. Even the world created by the great deity of origins is so huge and so miraculous. It is filled with countless battles. Wars big and small have never stopped. Even if there is a ruler on the surface, the small fights have never decreased. This unrestrained world, without a unified ideology, is actually so peaceful. You told me that this is a world that is filled with the flames of war and scars of war everywhere. But now that the war has ended and there is no more war, I can understand why so many weapons of war were left behind. The little angel looked at him and said, "Have you ever seen a world in a state similar to this planet in the void?" Yes, it has existed. But it is the kind where all the species are unified. There is only one species in an entire world. Either their ideology and the big goal are unified, or there is an indestructible belief, and it is the kind that is unified. Yun Nuashing nodded. It is because of the differences between life forms that there is conflict. When there is a stronger unity in some aspects, or when there is a strong constraint, there will naturally not be that kind of chaos. But this planet does not. No. Yun Nuashing sighed deeply. On one side, it is a world full of vitality and infinite beauty. On the other side, it is an ancient civilization that hides countless gigantic weapons. You see, it is too fake. Hearing his thoughtful tone, the little angel felt that something was not right. I keep feeling that you are talking to someone. Yun Nuashing raised his head and laughed. I am talking to you. We are communicating through our souls. Is there anyone else who can hear us? I don't know. I keep feeling that you are strange. After saying this, he felt that something was not right. He shook his head. No, you have always been strange. You have never been normal. Yun Nuashing paused and rolled his eyes. Just as he was about to argue with it about what it meant by weird all the time, Qing Lei suddenly grabbed his hand and jumped up. Ah, big sister, look in front. Yun Nuashing and the little angel raised their heads together. The horizontal well seemed to have reached the end. There was light in front of them. It was a light curtain. They could not see what was behind it, only the existence of light. Obviously, they would reach a place after passing through the light curtain. Perhaps it was a place connected to the gigantic weapon, or perhaps the surrounding walls of the well looked quite new. They were dim and had been covered by dust for countless years. There was nothing in the empty horizontal well except for a huge light curtain. There seemed to be no other choice but to step into it. Qing Lei jumped in front of the light curtain and tried to go around to the side. However, the light curtain blocked the entire horizontal well. Perhaps they could only jump forward to find out what would happen. Yun Nuashing and the little angel also came closer. They looked at the light curtain that suddenly appeared with interest. Beside them, a female explorer asked worriedly, "Big sister, can we still go through here?" Yun Nuashing shrugged. "What else can we do?" Qing Lei was obviously stunned. She was a little hesitant. It seemed that she had never encountered such a situation before. She did not know what to do at the moment. What will happen if we go through here? Well, Yun Nuashing raised her head and looked at the light curtain that was 100 meters high. She pondered for a while. Who knows? Maybe we will still be in the horizontal well after we go through here. Or maybe we will go to some strange place. Maybe we will be thrown into the Dian Black Sea. Qing Lei's body suddenly stiffened. Yun Nuashing tilted her head and saw her frightened expression. She could not help but let out a sinister smile. Then, she quickly hid it. She felt that she had scared enough. She coughed dryly. Ahem, don't worry. I was just scaring you. This might just be a teleportation light curtain. According to the function of the horizontal well and the vertical well, we might not be able to go far. Just follow us. Then, without saying a word, he dragged Qing Lei towards the light curtain. Qing Lei seemed to have accepted her fate. She was dragged towards the light curtain step by step. Then, she plunged into the world of light. The dazzling light made her close her eyes tightly. A faint cold wind blew on her face. She was very familiar with the unique cold air of the snow. Qing Lei's eyes widened. Her vision was a little dim. The dim light of the Vesuvius could not shine into the snowy mountain, but it had successfully illuminated the dark clouds. Through this limited vision, she could see the dark clouds that covered the entire snowy region. She was in a cave. Her position was a little high, so she could see higher places. The mountain walls were grayish-yellow. Only the entrance of the cave had accumulated snow. It seemed that there had not been a strong wind recently. Two figures stood side by side at the entrance of the cave, their long hair swaying gently with the weak cold wind. Qing Lei carefully looked at the cave. Then, she turned back and looked into the depths of the cave. There was no horizontal well behind her. It was just a sealed cave. She stood at the innermost part of the cave. When she reached out her hand to touch the cold mountain walls, her slender fingers were stained with some grayish-yellow color. She was a little stunned. She had never experienced something as magical as teleportation. She could not get used to it for a while. Fortunately, the psychological quality of an explorer was quite high. She went to some strange places every day. She was mentally prepared to encounter strange things one day. At this moment, she quickly put this bizarre thing behind her and treated it as reality. Then, she slowly walked towards the entrance of the cave and walked towards the two people. She heard light footsteps behind her. She felt a little nervous and forced herself to calm down. Yun Nuoxing did not turn her head. "Oh, you're back to your senses? I'm still a little confused." Qing Lei smiled bitterly. She slowly moved behind Yun Nuoxing. "Where are we now?" "In the snowy mountain. It's a teleportation light screen. It seems that we're quite lucky. It sent us to this place." "But this place, well, you can see for yourself." Yun Nuoxing and the little angel took a step to the side so that Qing Lei, who was slowly walking forward, could see the scenery in front of her. Then, she froze on the spot and turned into a stone statue. In front of her was a snowy mountain that was so white that it was almost transparent. The three of them were standing on a snowy mountain. They were only a dozen meters away from the top of the mountain. There was a small opening in the snowy mountain. It was the cave that they were in at this moment. In front of them, there was a snowy plain. The mountain that they were on was actually one of a row of continuous mountain ranges. It was like a natural wall that separated the front from the back. By the way, this snowy mountain was really quite high. Looking at the foot of the mountain, one could not tell how high it was. The connection with the previous space has been completely cut off. The little angel whispered in her soul. "We can't find out where we are. We can't find the right place. This place is like an isolation zone. We can't even sense the void. But our power is still there. So we were thrown into a box." Yun Nuoxing put her hands together as if she was putting something in between her hand. "Although I expected this, I didn't expect it to happen so soon." "Expected? What expected?" She was slightly stunned. "You knew in advance that we would be thrown here?" No. There's no way to predict this." Yun Nuoxing shook her head. "After all, this is someone else's game. We are just contestants. I just knew that something would happen, but I didn't know what it would be." "Huh." Yun Nuoxing tilted her head and looked at the confused little angel. She shook her head. "That's what I mean. If you can't understand, then what can I do?" "Eh? Can you not make it sound so weird? I'm getting goosebumps." She shivered and dropped 2 feathers. Then, she calmed down and said, "Then what's the situation now? What should we do?" "I don't know. Let's go and see." Yun Nuoxing blew on her palms. Well, she liked this action very much, although she didn't feel cold. She looked at Qing Lei. She was still a little stunned. Her eyes were straight, blank, and helpless. What's wrong? You're standing still like an ice sculpture. Have you been here before? No. Qing Lei came back to her senses. Her eyes were trembling. But there's only one place in the whole snow-capped mountains that I haven't been to. The heart of the snow-capped mountains? Yun Nuoxing raised her eyebrows. Now it was even more fun. In 3 years we've gone around most of the snow-capped mountains. Even if we haven't been there personally, we can recognize some places from the corners. Qing Lei nodded in a daze. But I can't help but feel that there's something familiar about this snow-capped land. Could it be a problem with the angle? She asked softly. Although there is such a problem, it won't be too big of an impact. We can recognize what we should. Those places that are too dangerous to go to might have a lot of dead beasts. But in order to avoid getting lost in the snow, we can still recognize those places even if we don't go. Qing Lei turned her head to the side and looked at the snow-capped mountains. I've never seen such a mountain range in the snow-capped mountains. It's endless and so magnificent. If it exists, it should be a very obvious road sign, so there's an 80% chance that this is the so-called heart of the snow-capped mountains? Yun Nuoxing turned his head and whispered to the little angel. By the way, I've lost all sense of the realm of the gods and the void. I'm an observer. No matter how far away I am, I can instinctively sense the realm of the god. I know that it still exists and stands in the void. When I first entered this world, I couldn't find the direction, but I know that it still exists. Now, I even suspect that the realm of the gods has been blown up. Yun Nuoxing looked at the blurry snow-capped mountains in the distance. Of course, according to the characteristics of the realm of the gods, I think that something has blocked my connection with it, or even cut it off. Logically speaking, other than me, the realm of the gods can't be blown up. It was speechless. Then now. It was a little worried. This place made even a strange life form like it feel a little uneasy. This uneasiness even made it look behind it. There was no way out. Obviously, no matter where they went before, there was only an empty cave behind them. Why don't we walk around first? I don't know what this heart of the snow-capped mountains is, but there's no point in standing here. Qing Lei couldn't help but say when she saw the two people standing there in a daze, looking at each other without saying anything for a long time. After saying that, she walked out of the cave full of energy. It was as if the shock and surprise just now had disappeared and turned into motivation. Wait a minute. Before she could step out of the cave, Yun Nuoxing pulled her back with one hand. The courage she had just mustered almost disappeared completely. She asked nervously, What's wrong? Yun Nuoxing shook his head and took a deep breath. They had been standing in the vicinity of the cave and didn't step out. Now, I'll take a few steps first. If there's anything I can react to, you might not be able to handle it. Because they were in the heart of the snow-capped mountains, Qing Lei, who knew the mystery and strangeness of this place, didn't say anything else. She swallowed her saliva and stared at Yun Nuoxing with her eyes wide open. Although Yun Nuoxing said it casually, he had already imagined what might happen. Then, he slowly lifted his foot and took the first half step out. Little by little, his foot was close to the edge of the snow line. The next step was to leave the range of the cave. He forced himself to be alert and carefully lifted his foot. Slowly, bit by bit, he stretched it out. After he crossed the snow line that was close to the cave, a cold and strange feeling suddenly spread throughout his body. It was as if he was in an endless void in an instant. Chapter 12:30. The Dark Void. Ah, that was nonsense. In this life, he had been in the void for many generations. The time he spent in the void was hundreds of times longer than the total time of billions of people on a planet who stayed at home for their entire lives. He could not be more familiar with this place. He could still remember everything clearly. He remembered everything. He remembered that he had just put half of his foot out of the cave. Then, everything happened so abruptly. The world froze. Everything stopped. However, his mind continued to move forward. He could still feel himself. It was as if time had stopped, and he was independent of time. Time was just a quantifier created by the life in the great Yuan realm for the natural activities of the Sea of Time. It was used to observe and restrain something. In fact, time was meaningless to the void. The void was nothing to the Sea of Time. Both of them were essential elements of the world. Although the Sea of Time was located under the void, they did not interfere with each other. They existed together and would never die. Just like the life in the world had its own timeline and gave time a meaning, the existence of the Sea of Time also had its own meaning. Time. His perception of time had become a little blurry. The time he had experienced had become a vague interval number. He had accumulated countless years and wandered in the void where time was blurred. He shuttled through the layers of rules and wandered in the Sea of Time. He was like a faint ray of light that quietly wandered through any place. When he passed through the gaps of time, the Sea of Time produced a small countercurrent. To him, time was the easiest and most intimate thing to sense. The aura of time that settled on him could even crush a part of the void. Therefore, there was no need to ask how far away this instant of eternity was, because even he did not know. In that instant, he seemed to have seen the scene of everything in the world turning into ashes and then being reborn from the ashes. Time seemed to be flowing in reverse. Everything flowed back to the beginning of everything, back to the time when nothing existed, then everything was released. Pooh! The sound of his feet stepping on the snow was exceptionally crisp, and the gray and stagnant world started to move again. Just as he said, everything was released, and everything started to function normally again. The only thing that was not right was that he was still living in this dream, and could not wake up. But, actually, there was no need to investigate that. For a moment, he had an idea to treat those memories as a dream. Now that he was living in reality, there was no problem. Because this dream would last for a very, very long time, he could not put too much of his emotions and thoughts into the dream. If he were to wake up one day, then he would combine the two into reality. But now was not the time to talk about those things. In that instant of stagnation and release, in the eyes of Qing Lei and the other girl, Yun Nuoxing had only leisurely stretched out her foot. Then, she staggered a little abnormally and quickly returned to normal. Everything was as before, as if nothing had happened. They also did not know what that stagger meant. Well, it seems that there is no problem. Yun Nuoxing turned around and gave the two girls a thumbs up. Then, she waved her hand and pointed down the mountain. Anyway, let's go down and take a look first. Qing Lei let out a long breath. As she walked out of the cave, she said, "Big Sister is always scaring people. How could there be anything strange?" Yun Nuoxing quietly watched her walk out of the cave safely. Then, he tilted his head and looked at a certain little angel, who followed her footsteps and floated out of the cave. She stood beside him and looked at him, tilting her head. Yun Nuoxing smiled. Her somewhat cold hands reached into the pockets of her windbreaker. Step by step, she walked towards the plains under the snow mountain. Qing Lei and the little angel followed behind her unhurriedly. "You seem to be a little strange." The little angel floated a little faster and came to stand beside him. She looked straight into his eyes with her golden eyes. "A moment is eternity? What happened in that moment?" "You are stumped." Yun Nuoxing grinned. "How would I know what happened in that moment?" Then, as expected, the unnatural pause just now was like the discomfort released from the long-time stop. She sniffed. "The aura of time on you has become much stronger. You won't be swallowed by the Sea of Time, will you?" "Who knows?" Yun Nuoxing shrugged as if nothing had happened. His soul had carried too much time and existed beyond the time limit set by the rules of the void. If there was such a limit, the shackles he broke through should be an irreparable hole. However, in fact, the void did not have such a boring limit. There was no limit on how long a life could live, and there was no limit on how long a soul could live. People whose lifespans were determined by fate. Oh, here it was referring to mortals. Mortals would embark on special paths due to various coincidences and various circumstances. They would break free from the shackles at that moment. In fact, it was almost the same concept. If there is a day when the aura I carry becomes a rope and drags me into the sea of time, I will sink without any buoyancy until I am dragged to the bottom of the sea. At that time, I will merge into that sea and become the spokesperson of time. I will wander between the gaps of the world and silently watch everything happen. I will no longer be able to participate in anything. As Yun Nuoshing spoke, she tilted her head and smiled at it, shaking her head. It is just a speculation from a long time ago. Oh, here it is referring to the time of the quarter moon. It is like an old man who has lived for too long and is mumbling about something that will never happen. You were about to disappear in time just now, and you can still say such things so calmly. She shook her head helplessly. It seems that I am worried about you for nothing. Seeing that Yun Nuoshing did not care and smiled without any worry, the little angel sighed and decided not to discuss those topics with him in the future. Now, although I don't know what you have experienced that made you smile even more strangely, so what happened just now? Well, do you know what is in this snow mountain? Yun Nuoshing raised his head, which was a habit of his when he was thinking. It was as if by looking at the sky, he would not be restrained by any thoughts and perspectives. He would not be limited by any thoughts and perspectives, and he would be stuck in a small view. What is it? I can't say. I only have an immature guess. It is not about this snow mountain, and I don't know what it is about. It may be related to this world, or it may not be. Anyway, it should be related to the creation of the world. The little angel was slightly stunned. It's that simple? There was a helpless smile on Yun Nuoshing's face, and he shook his head. The creation of the world. The creation of a world was a small matter. For them, it was just another world of light being born in the vast and endless void. There was nothing special about it, and it was not worth their attention. But the creation of the world that I am talking about is not the birth of a small world of light, nor is it the rebirth of the void. It is the real, the moment of origin. Its expression trembled, and even its wings stopped flapping. There was a subtle change in its expression. Was that the moment of origin, the moment when the great Yuan realm was born? Time flowed backwards, and all tangible and intangible things were being retracted, flowing backwards towards the original point of origin. The void returned to zero, and everything ceased to exist. In an instant everything was released. Yun Nuoshing said calmly, "That was the scene that I saw." So, you think that what happened here, what is about to happen, will be related to the scene when the great Yuan realm was first born? If it is not fooling around with me, then that should be the truth. It seemed to understand what he was talking about. Maybe it was the world itself, or maybe it was something in the world. According to him, they had already attracted its attention when they came to the world, and then all of this happened right under its nose. That was it. Therefore, he was looking forward. He was waiting for it to do something. Maybe what was happening now was just an appetizer, just the beginning. Or maybe everything had come to an end, and it was time to retract the net, and it was time to witness all of this happening. Rumble, the sound was like an earthquake, and in this snowfield, it was as if millions of tons of ice and snow were rushing down from a height of several thousand meters. The dull sound suddenly rumbled in this snowfield, like a thunder that had not been heard for millions of years in the dark clouds in the sky, and it constantly attacked Qing Lei's nerves. As for Yun Nuoshing and Yun Nuoshing, they were also stunned at first, but they were not worried at all. They were just witnessing the sudden internal collapse of the towering snow mountain in the distance with their own eyes. The entire snow mountain collapsed like a landslide, and this small scene was nothing. Compared to this, Yun Nuoxing still felt that the whole sun was facing. Oh wait, he was wrong. He still felt that the scene of an entire planet crashing into the sun was more impactful. As long as one was not blind, even an illiterate person could become a philosopher who could see the void with a single glance, or a poet who sang and praised life. If he was not blind and had not been burned to ashes, he would have the chance. However, there was someone present who obviously did not think so. When Qing Lei saw the towering snow mountain about 2,000 to 3,000 meters away collapse like it had been blown up, her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Especially when she saw the avalanche caused by the collapse of the snow mountain, she was so frightened that she screamed and subconsciously pulled Yun Nuoxing to run back. Avalanche, run. She had wandered around the snow-capped mountains for more than 3 years and had seen many large and small avalanches. If one thought that the distance of 2,000 to 3,000 meters was very safe, well, most people who had such thoughts would have been buried under the snow and become ice sculptures. Don't be afraid, it's just a small scene. You're so calm. Hey, you're so strong, girl. Yun Nuoxing calmly put his hands in his pockets and was about to act cool, but he was pulled by Qing Lei and staggered. This careless girl was an explorer after all. She walked in those strange places all year round and had to deal with a lot of things. At the very least, she had a lot of strength. If he did not speak, he would probably be dragged back like this. Yun Nuoxing shrugged his shoulders, and with a wave of his hand, he grabbed this girl by the waist, and carried her up under his armpit. Then, he walked towards the place where the snow mountain had collapsed and the earth was trembling. Qing Lei's face was filled with tears as she looked at the white line from afar. Her face was filled with ice and snow. Woo-woo. Big sister, I haven't finished writing my will yet. Why don't you wait for me to draft my will first? It hurts. Yun Nuoxing hit this girl who had obviously forgotten something. He shook his head helplessly and said, "Don't worry, it's just a small scene. If you turn back now, all your previous efforts will be wasted." Qing Lei calmed down immediately. She tried hard to raise her head and looked at Yun Nuoxing's calm and beautiful face. Then, she tilted her head and looked at the little angel, who did not seem to feel the power of nature at all. Only then did she remember that the two of them were also so calm in the horizontal well just now. It was as if nothing would cause the two of them to panic at all. She rolled her eyes and suddenly showed a sly smile. "Big sister, you said before that those creatures from the previous season must have known something. Then, they felt at ease to build those things under the snow mountain. In my opinion, Big sister actually knows something, right?" Yun Nuoxing was stunned. He thought about it seriously and then shook his head seriously. "You don't say. I really don't know what's under the snow mountain." Qing Lei's smiling face froze. "Not only don't know, we haven't studied the snow mountain. In fact, it was an accident that we met you that day. Before that, whether to go to the snow-capped mountains or not was just a topic that had not been decided," he said with a sigh. Qing Lei's face that had just recovered became pale again. But after a moment, she threw away those emotions and looked puzzled. "Big sister, why did you come to the snow-capped mountains?" "Come to do what?" Yun Nuoxing and the little angel looked at each other. Both of them scratched their heads. They really did not know what they were going to do. It was just that this was a place that could not be explored at all. Incidentally, it was also the place that attracted the most attention in this world. So, they decided to sneak over to take a look. Of course, their plan was still a plan at that time. Coincidentally, they bumped into a group of adventurers. Qing Lei's face was ashen. Qing Lei's face was ashen. Her heart was in pain. "We were going to investigate something, just like you were looking for the traces of the creatures from the previous season in the snow-capped mountains. You can think of us as having similar goals, but our goals are more vague and abstract because we don't know what we are looking for. Goals are goals. First, we have to look for it. Maybe we will find it if we look for it. Looking at how calm Yun Nuoshing and the little angel were, especially when the avalanche swooped down, Qing Lei suddenly felt that extraordinaries were indeed extraordinaries. Just look at their temperament and attitude. Could they consider that there was a mortal beside them? If they were to crash into the avalanche like that, they would be scared to death. They were really going to crash into the avalanche. Qing Lei could already see the avalanche swooping down on the wilderness like a tsunami. The difference was that this was a tsunami that occurred on the snowy plains. The white waves were roaring and getting closer and closer to them. At this time, it was too late to turn around and run. If she was not being held by someone, she would have written her will immediately, hoping that someone would come here thousands of years later to dig her out. Big sister, how do you think I will look better when I am frozen into an ice sculpture? Qing Lei reached out and tugged at Yun Nuoshing's clothes. Yun Nuoshing. As expected, it's better to look more peaceful. After all, this is for people thousands of years later to see. If you look hideous or in too much pain when you're dug out, it will definitely be very scary, right? The little angel was stunned and immediately understood what the little girl was thinking. Yun Nuoshing was 2 seconds slower, but he also reacted. With an amused expression on his face, he couldn't help but chuckle. He bent his finger and flicked the forehead of the little explorer who had begun to think about how to die peacefully. Why are you flicking me again? Qing Lei covered her forehead and lowered her head as she muttered. Don't worry, you won't die. Yun Nuoshing shook her head in annoyance. The scenes we've seen are far beyond your imagination. It's just a little avalanche. Of course, from your point of view, it might be very scary, but to us, it doesn't make a difference if a snow mountain collapses or half a continent collapses. It's a difference that we don't have to pay attention to, she added. Qing Lei's eyes were twinkling like stars. She had an expression that said, although I don't know what you are talking about, I feel that you are very powerful. However, let me, this mortal body of mine, write my will first. She was conflicted. The feeling of the shaking intensified a lot, and the roar echoed in the entire snowfield. On both sides of the path that the two people and the guy who was being carried were moving forward, the snowfield suddenly burst open with a roar. Countless ice and snow poured down the cracks, like 2 rifts in a glacier, revealing the hidden scene in the depths of the glacier to everyone. The 2 rifts were still widening and spreading into the distance. At the same time, the huge avalanche that swooped down in front of the 3 people suddenly seemed to be blocked in front of it. It immediately split into 2 snow waves and fell into the rifts on both sides, like the scene of the sea pouring into the cracks in the earth. Seeing the snow waves that were about to bury them alive being separated by such an incredible situation and falling into the rifts that suddenly appeared below, Qing Lei could not help but pull Yun Nuoshing's sleeve and said, Big sister, although I know that you are an ice curse master and it's a little exaggerated, but you are going through too much trouble to deal with an avalanche, aren't you? Yun Nuoshing was still talking to the little angel about what happened. When he heard this, he could not help but be stunned. He could not help but jump up and down. I really didn't do this. It's separated by itself. Qing Lei looked at him as if he was a liar, which made Yun Nuoshing not know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that what he did before was too unobservable. After all, what he did with energy was like something that happened naturally to mortals who could not observe the flow of energy. Looking at what he did before and then looking at what he did now, it was no wonder that Qing Lei did not believe that they did not do anything. But in fact, they really did not do anything. This show, this avalanche, this rift, was a show arranged by someone else. They were just quietly walking on the snowfield. However, he really did not expect this scene. Now he was even more confused about what would happen. After all, he was already prepared to deal with the avalanche. Now, he did not even have to do anything. In the collapsed snow mountain, something gradually revealed itself. It was something that was hidden under the snow mountain, a familiar grayish-blue color. A grayish-blue building that seemed to be the tip of a tower gradually revealed itself along with the collapse of the snow mountain. It was a tower-like building, but it only had the appearance of a tower. The interior should be empty. It did not seem to have an interior structure. It was like a tower of parts pieced together by a large number of parts. Other than a little symmetry and a sense of structure, it was impossible to tell what it was for. It was divided into two parts. One was the circle of 8 spikes at the top, and the other was the base that was embedded in the collapsed snow mountain. The upper part was suspended about a few hundred meters away from the base. It was a behemoth that was hidden in the snow mountain. Perhaps it had always existed here, and was cast into a snow mountain by the ice and snow that never melted all year round. But no matter what the reason was, it had now become something that was open to them, as if it was following the flow of a certain plot. The host has already prepared to entertain the guests. Yun Nuoshing put Qing Lei down and tidied up her clothes. Whether it is a Hongmen banquet or not, we have to go. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of the scene that we spent so much time setting up? The little angel shrugged. You have the final say. Qing Lei looked left and right, scratching her head in confusion. I always feel that you have known something long ago. I was the only one who was kept in the dark. No, really. The two people waved their hands repeatedly. Yun Nuoshing smiled. But aren't we going to find out now? Chapter 12:31. Hidden under the 10,000-year-old ice and snow was an ancient and magnificent tower. Its actual size was magnified a lot when one got closer. The top half of the tower was engraved with 8 spikes, looking like an upside-down jellyfish. The base below was arranged in rings, and one could clearly see that some parts of the rings were engraved with the same gorgeous decorations, which seemed to be charms and runes. When the ice and snow had completely fallen off, the ground of the snowfield had sunk a little. The towering snowy mountain had disappeared, leaving only a ground full of snow and large pieces of broken ice. Qing Lei stood in front of the base of the giant tower, looking up at the behemoth with her mouth agape. Her face was full of indescribable shock. Judging from the color and style, this should be something from the Lost Clan, but what is this? I have never seen this model before, and there is no record of this type at all. Qing Lei could not suppress the shock in her heart and said. From many records, she estimated that she had seen as many as 20 types of lost ruins. The shaft she saw today was not a new type discovered. It had appeared before, and there were many more. If it was really a weapon like her big sister said, it was probably a fairly basic weapon. It was powerful, simple, and convenient to make. As for the one in front of her, it was the first time she had seen it, and it did not have a huge city or other ancillary buildings beside it. It stood alone in the world of ice and snow. Big sister, lost ruins have never appeared alone. At the very least, there would be several buildings, one main building and several ancillary buildings. Can you see if there is anything else around here? Qing Lei pulled Yun Nuoshing's sleeve and said. Hearing that, Yun Nuoshing nodded. His spirit spread out, and in an instant it spread to the end of this sealed world, and went hundreds of meters deep into the snowy ground. In the end, he unexpectedly found that this sealed space was a perfect sphere, just like the area covered by an energy barrier. No, just this one. According to what you said, lost ruins appear in groups, then this one in front of us might be one of the more special ones, perhaps. Qing Lei murmured and nodded. She started to walk around the base of this huge tower. As she walked, she pondered and casually said, I thought I would see something when I came out of that horizontal well. What? For example, some large space used to store energy or something. Qing Lei deliberated over her words. I didn't expect to come to such a strange place, and see an even stranger lost ruin. Before I saw this, the whole world thought that lost ruins were all in group. Who would have thought that I would see a lost ruin with only one building today? Yun Nuoshing chuckled. There's something to brag about again. No, forget it. Qing Lei argued and shook her head helplessly. She said, "Big sister, what do you think this strange tower is used for?" Yun Nuoxing also tilted his head to look at the base of this grayish-blue tower and fell into deep thought. To be honest, he really couldn't recognize these things. Among the people he knew, probably only Navila could recognize what these things were used for at a glance. If it was him, it would be difficult for him to tell the use of this strange building with just a glance. Although he had learned about it, it was only a shallow understanding. Moreover, this building didn't emit any energy reaction. As long as there was a little energy fluctuation, he could determine what this building was used for through the form of the energy fluctuation. It's hard to say. I don't know, Yun Nuoxing admitted. But if we look up from below, we can't see anything. Why don't we go up and take a look? Look, there's a staircase. Yun Nuoxing pointed to the front. The tower was a structure of overlapping rings. The base was also stacked into 3 layers. The connection between each layer was thinner. The overall appearance of the tower was cylindrical. The grayish-blue surface was engraved with gorgeous and exquisite patterns. Those patterns were used to guide and store energy. In the 4 directions of the round tower there were 4 steep stairs. It was as if 4 grooves were dug to place the stairs. There was no way to go inside. Just like what he felt at first glance, there was no internal space in the upper half or the lower half of the tower. It was like a sculpture carved out of a huge iron lump. There was no way to go inside without digging a passage. Even if you went inside, you would not see anything. Do we go up? Qing Lei looked at the 1-meter-wide staircase and frowned hesitantly. The strange scene just now was still flashing in front of her eyes. Yun Nuoxing and the little angel tried their best to deny that it was caused by them. She also chose to believe that it could only be caused by this thing or something even stranger. She believed that it was related to this tower. Now they had to go up this strange building. Don't worry. Yun Nuoxing saw the worry on the little girl's face. She knew that she had encountered enough strange things today. It was enough to overturn her understanding of many things. For a while, she did not dare to act rashly. She smiled and patted her shoulder. No matter what happens, it won't be a problem for us. You won't be in danger if you follow us. Qing Lei raised her head and looked at Yun Nuoxing's beautiful smiling face. She frowned slightly and smiled. Anyway, it seems like we don't have a way out. Well, let's just believe in Big Sister. No matter what happens, I won't regret this trip to the Snow Mountain. Yun Nuoxing smiled and nodded. She looked at the little angel, and the 2 of them walked towards the staircase that was forcibly cut out from the wall. Qing Lei followed closely behind. The 3 of them stepped on the grayish-blue staircase together. The sound of their footsteps sounded like they were stepping on bamboo and stone. It doesn't sound like metal. Maybe it's a special material from this world, Yun Nuoxing said softly in her soul as she stepped on the grayish-blue staircase. If that's true, then this material is already extinct, she replied in her soul. What's wrong? I've taken a look. There's nothing similar to this grayish-blue material on this planet. She paused for a moment and said, Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the previous life form had completely mined this material. Maybe there are still some places where this material is hidden, but I haven't found it yet. Yun Nuoxing looked at her and pondered for a moment. She then looked at Qing Lei and said, Qing Lei, do you know what these grayish-blue buildings, the lost ruins, are made of? Qing Lei was stunned for a moment. She did not expect him to bring up such a seemingly unrelated topic. She was stunned for a second before she fell into deep thought. She knew, but she still had to think carefully for a while. This is something called a material that can be found all over the continent. However, it was during the ancient times, during the origin of this season, that material was almost exhausted. What was left of it could not be used for anything, so it was protected. This is also one of the reasons why the Lost Clan is related to the previous or the origin of this season. Many scholars have speculated that there was a period of time where the continent must have had a lot of these grayish-blue materials. However, they were all mined by the Lost Clan. This building material has excellent properties of storing and guiding energy. Ah, if that's the case, big sister, it's not impossible for it to be a weapon. Perhaps it's because of this condition that I agree with your theory. Oh, I see. That's understandable. Yun Nuoshing nodded. The base of the tower was more than 100 meters tall. The entire staircase led to the top of the base. When passing through the 3 relatively thin floors, one could walk along the gap between the upper and lower floors to other parts of the base. Little Angel walked around the top of the tower with some interest. She thought that she would find a hidden entrance, but unfortunately, it was a solid building. There was no internal space at all. Little Angel also realized this as she walked around. She walked around the other side of the staircase for a while before returning to the middle floor. The 3 of them climbed the tower for more than 10 minutes. Yun Nuoshing and Little Angel were mainly concerned about Qing Lei. They did not climb all the way to the top in one go. The steep staircase required them to lift their knees. There were also more than 1,000 steps. Even though Qing Lei had been walking around some strange places all year round and had a lot of stamina, she could not withstand such torment. As soon as they reached the top floor, a gust of cold air from the high altitude brushed against their faces. Qing Lei's clothes were already soaked through. Yun Nuoshing raised her head and stood at the top of the base. She looked up at the inverted octopus above her. She could clearly see the texture on the octopus and the 8 spires. The round part that pointed downwards had a circular opening in the middle. Looking at the opening, she could see nothing. However, it looked like the dome of an inverted circular building. Through the circular opening, she could see the grayish-blue building inside. It was solid without a doubt. As for the top floor of the base, there did not seem to be anything particularly noteworthy. There was a smooth platform on the top, and its surface was translucent like a mirror. She could see the bottom of the platform about a foot deep. It was transparent like an iceberg. It was engraved with a lot of gorgeous and complicated patterns. That was it. It was a solid lump at the center. There's nothing. Qing Lei sat on the top of the stairs and panted for a while. After resting for a while, she leisurely followed Yun Nuoshing and Little Angel to the middle of the platform at the top of the tower. She looked around. There was nothing. However, she could see the direction they came from. There was an endless row of snowy mountains. The cave they just came out of was still in the center of this row of mountains. But it's really incredible. Qing Lei put her palm in front of her forehead and looked at the cave in the distance. We came out of that cave. After passing through the horizontal well, we thought we would see more buildings. However, we came to a seemingly unrelated snowfield. Well, we can't see the back of the row of mountains from here. We don't know if this is the hinterland of the snowy mountains. It doesn't matter if this is the hinterland of the snowy mountains. In short, there are secrets that ordinary people can't find. Yun Nuoshing squatted down and looked at the top of the platform. He said, "Look here." Qing Lei swung her long hair and slipped over. She leaned into Yun Nuoshing's arms and watched him look at the center of the platform. Below the ice surface, there was a ring. There were 3 chains connected to the edge of the ring. The other end of the chains was inside the ice surface and connected to the edge of the tower. Is there something? Qing Lei looked up in confusion. Yun Nuoshing lowered his head. Their faces were only 1 or 2 inches apart. He looked at her face and squatted down a little more. He pointed at the ring embedded under the ice surface and said, "Look inside. There are flickering spots of light around it. It's very, very dark. You can only see it when you open your eyes." "Ah, I see it." Qing Lei opened her eyes and noticed the spots of light he was talking about. It was like looking at a city in the night sky from the edge of a distant mountain range. The lights shone in the night sky, flickering with attractive and warm light, making people want to go home. "What's wrong with these spots of light?" Although she saw them, she didn't understand why he was pointing at them. There's a weak energy remaining, Yun Nuoshing said softly. He stood up and pointed at the upside-down jellyfish above. He pointed at the circular opening in the middle, which looked like a crack in the dome. These two positions correspond to each other. It's a bit like some kind of transmission device in my memory, but it's very different. It's just that these 2 points are the same. If I'm not wrong, those spots of light might be a destination or something. Through this, maybe we can. Before he finished speaking, Qing Lei exclaimed when she heard that it was a transmission device. She wanted to stand up in a hurry, but she staggered and lost her balance. She pressed her palm directly on the ice surface. At the position where her palm was on the ice surface, a dim spot of light suddenly lit up. Transmission. Yun Nuoshing finished his words. Then he felt something and lowered his head quickly. He saw that Qing Lei might have accidentally triggered something. He couldn't help but be stunned. Where did you press? Well, I. Qing Lei jumped up with a cry. When she saw the spot of light under the ice surface lit up, her face turned pale. At this moment, the little angel, who was wandering around, also felt the movement. He quickly came over and asked, "What's wrong?" As soon as he said that, the space between the dome crack in the middle of the upside-down jellyfish and the ice surface under their feet lit up. Then, the 3 chains under the ice surface also lit up. The dim patterns that had been silent for many years also lit up. More and more grayish-blue lights appeared in the air. The grayish-blue lights seemed to have turned into thin needles hanging down from above. Then, the 3 chains and the rings slowly rotated with a series of cracking sounds like breaking ice. A few seconds later, the whole platform flashed and the 3 people disappeared. The ring and the chains slowed down and the grayish-blue lights in the space also disappeared. In the cold and gloomy space, the world seemed to be forever shrouded in darkness. There was no light. It was cold and dead. There was no warmth and no life. It was so cold that people felt that their blood would freeze in their veins. The sky was dark. Nothing existed. It was empty and empty. There was no obstruction in sight. As long as one's eyesight was good enough, they might be able to see something extremely far away in this dark place. When they looked around, an extremely huge object occupied their entire sight and the entire sky. Then, a light suddenly appeared on a short mountain in this dark world, causing the surrounding soil and sand to float off the ground. Realm of order. Following a crisp sound, a transparent energy barrier enveloped the light that appeared. The power of order and the power of rules changed the situation within the energy barrier. After that, the light slowly appeared and threw the 3 of them onto the short mountain that was shrouded in darkness and disappeared. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel landed steadily on their feet. Qing Lei staggered and quickly grabbed Yun Nuoshing's arm to prevent herself from falling off the short mountain. When she came back to her senses, she quickly looked around. When she saw the dark and silent space, she couldn't help but widen her eyes. Wow! Where is this? Yun Nuoshing looked around. As if she sensed something, she slowly turned around. Then, her cheeks twitched slightly. Hidden in the darkness, across the black mountain in front of her, she saw a huge object. The edges of the sphere were covered in yellow and red, making it look like a huge cake. It was the satellite of Wei Su. If that was the case, based on this position, this angle, and this reality, they could only be in the shadow continent near the satellite. The continent that was still being torn apart by the satellite in front of them. Seeing that the 2 people didn't say anything, Qing Lei was also stunned. She slowly turned her head in the direction they were looking at. Then, she saw a shocking scene that she would never forget in her life. She also deduced their current location from this scene. Her face, which had not recovered from the shock, suddenly became so pale that it could be seen clearly in this shadow world. That big sister, did I get into trouble? Qing Lei's face was sad. Her mind was filled with extremely complicated thoughts. It was so complicated that, A lot of thoughts were spinning around. The words, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die," kept repeating in her mind. Yun Nuoshing still calmly put his hands in his pockets. Well, in terms of results, it's not really a disaster. But in terms of behavior, there's no doubt that you've caused a huge disaster. But I'm also a person who only cares about result. At least for now, it's still peaceful. Oh right, I forgot to say, welcome to the Shadow Continent. You've gone much further than your teacher. He just glanced at you from afar across the starry sky, but you've come here directly. Qing Lei almost fainted. Her face was full of shock and there was no joy in it. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel didn't immediately explore this destroyed continent. They didn't even release their souls. They just sat here with Qing Lei. Looking at the little girl's frightened look, they couldn't help but look at each other and shake their heads. They usually encountered situations that were more thrilling and more incredible than this, but they could still deal with it calmly. But for the little girl, this was undoubtedly a super development, and it was a bit too much. She would never have thought that 10 minutes ago, she was in a world of ice and snow. 10 minutes later, she came to a dark, sunless, and even colder world. If it weren't for the support of the order barrier, she might have turned into a popsicle on the spot or exploded on the spot. Have you calmed down? Yun Nuoshing stretched out her finger and poked the back of the little girl's head, and said softly, "Well, a little." Qing Lei took a deep breath and calmed down a little. At least her hands were no longer trembling. She felt that if she had experienced all this herself, she might have been scared out of her wits by now. Fortunately, there were two incredible sisters beside her. She saw that the two of them were not surprised or even worried. She couldn't help but say, "Big sisters, aren't you nervous? We were suddenly thrown to such a far place. We might not be able to go back." "Well," Yun Nuoshing raised her head and said lightly, "Wei Su's satellite will approach the continent to a limit every night. The Shadow Continent will be a little closer, so we can still go back." Qing Lei, the little angel, rolled her eyes at her. If they wanted to go back, they could go back now. Why did they have to follow such a big red and yellow blob across the star field at an unimaginable speed? They were now on the Shadow Continent, which was hidden in the shadow of Wei Su's satellite. Wei Su's satellite. They were rushing back to Wei Su's side at full speed, strolling around, and visiting that continent in the middle of the night. To put it simply, they were now following the Shadow Continent and Wei Su's satellite to the remnant sun. And if their calculations were correct, they would be able to see the remnant sun in 2 hours. It was really exciting just thinking about it. Qing Lei saw that the two of them not only weren't nervous, but also seemed to be looking forward to something. Suddenly, she became even more nervous. She could casually figure out what was happening now, but because she knew, she became even more nervous. "Big sisters, why aren't you nervous? We're rushing to Wei Su now. The light of that star will burn us to death." Qing Lei became even more afraid as she thought about it. What's there to be nervous about? Yun Nuoshing and the little angel looked at each other, and the two of them sighed in unison. "We're used to these kinds of things." Qing Lei thought about it and decided that it was better to faint. Chapter 1232. In the dark and boundless starry skies, a colossal object was flying across the planetary system at a speed that defied all laws and common sense. That tremendous speed should have torn it apart, but what was sucked in by its great gravitational pull and covered by its shadow was a shattered continent. The two maintained an extremely close distance, balancing and steadily rushing towards the brightest region ahead. As it got closer and closer to the remains of the sun, the storm in the colossal planet also became extremely hot, even glowing faintly as if it was about to combust. It was daytime on the Shadow Continent. The sky was slightly brighter, like the first light of dawn. The light from the companion star drove out the darkness of the dark continent, allowing Yun Nuoshing and the others to see the appearance of the continent clearly. It was pitch black, as if the earth had been scorched. Black and gray alternated, and it was covered with strange patterns, like the appearance of molten volcanic magma after it cooled and stabilized. This was evidence that the land had once melted, proving that it was not forever shrouded in shadow. This was good news, but also bad news. Of course, this was nothing to the two of them. However, the little girl beside them could not calm down. Her face was full of sweat, and she could not calm down. She sat on a flat rock with her legs bent, but it was as if the rock had nails on it. No matter how hard she sat, she could not sit steadily and comfortably. "I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. It's getting hot, it's getting hot. I'll be burned to charcoal. I don't want to die in such a strange place." Yun Nuoshing had been listening to such nagging for a long time. They had been here for an hour, and even the little angel could not stand her nagging and walked to the side. A few minutes later, Yun Nuoshing could not stand Qing Lei's nagging. She shook her head helplessly, patted her shoulder and said, "Okay, stop nagging. It's really going to be fine. As long as you don't leave this barrier, even if you rush to the center of Tai Wei Su, you won't be burned to death. Just trust us." Qing Lei raised her head to look at Yun Nuoshing's incomparably serious expression, and calmed down a little. Just as Yun Nuoshing was about to heave a sigh of relief, her little face collapsed again. "But that's a star, it's light. If we were to pass by it, how could it be fine? How could it be fine? No matter how ridiculous Big Sister is, it's, in short, just trust us." Yun Nuoshing patted her head, shook her head and said, "It's not good for you to stay here all the time. It's rare that we're here. We're here earlier than we planned, so we have to investigate carefully. If you're afraid, don't walk out of this barrier. I guarantee with the lives of the entire continent that nothing will happen to you." Qing Lei was stunned. While she was in a daze, Yun Nuoshing and the little angel had already walked to the edge of the barrier. She stared blankly and waited for another 2 seconds before she hurriedly jumped up. "Wait for me. Wait a minute. Don't leave me here alone." Yun Nuoshing and Yun Nuoshing were a little confused when they turned around and saw the girl who seemed to be scared out of her wits rushing towards them. Yun Nuoshing couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you scared?" Yes. But I'm more scared that you'll leave me alone in this strange place filled with black fog." Qing Lei wiped her sweat and said with a pitiful look. Yun Nuoshing glanced at her, then turned to look at the little angel. The latter shrugged at him, so he said softly, "Whatever, but don't run around. As you said, we're in a very dangerous place. You'll only be safe by our side. Don't go too far, or else." Yun Nuoshing held back the second half of his sentence, but Qing Lei forced a silly smile. "I know, Big Sister won't be able to save me when the time comes, right?" No. He wanted to say that he would have to explain to her about resurrection when the time comes. Logically speaking, she was just a mortal. Even if she suddenly died in front of him, he could just grab her soul that had not yet dissipated and casually reconstruct a body. Moreover, it would be reconstructed with his divine power, which would be countless times stronger than the previous body. Even if her soul was scattered, there would still be traces of soul imprints and life imprints. He could bring them to the lowest level of the concept of laws, connect to the world core of this world, and reconstruct her again. That's right. Anyway, that's what I mean. Just don't leave our range. In fact, it's very safe. Yun Nuoshing nodded, but after thinking about it, he decided not to scare the little girl. "Okay. I know." Qing Lei nodded and moved closer, her little hand reaching out to Yun Nuoshing's arm and said, "Big Sister, can you let me use your hand for a while?" Her hand was still trembling. Despite being comforted and told countless times that it was very safe, she still felt uneasy. Before seeing the truth, she could not calm down, and her heart was always worried about that moment. Yun Nuoshing could not do anything about it. After all, anyone who was suddenly thrown into this place and knew what was going to happen next would feel uneasy. Just showing a faint sense of uneasiness and nervousness was the greatest restraint. If it was someone with a weaker mentality, they might have already chosen to commit suicide. Look, the mountain next to them was also quite tall. It did not seem like the time to discuss this. This was a land full of black, and the mountains in the distance were faintly gray. Yun Nuoshing and the others slid down a gentle slope from the mountain. In front of them was a wilderness with gentle terrain and gravel all over. The gravity here was also quite low. In fact, this broken continent still had gravity, and it was already a miracle that it was not attracted by the companion star next to it. Perhaps it was because this shadow continent was very big, about 1/3 the size of its companion star, much bigger than the planet Qing and the others were on. They walked quite a distance away from the companion star and climbed up a rather tall hill. Standing at the top of the hill, they could see the upper half of the giant companion star in the sky. The pitch-black starry sky was slightly hazy. This was caused by it absorbing and reflecting the light of Wei Su. If it got closer, it would also become very bright. So spectacular. Even though she was here and knew what she was facing at this moment, Qing Lei could not help but praise. Standing here and looking at the huge planet in front of her, watching the red and yellow storm roaring across the entire planet, she could not help but gulp. Such a magnificent scene, such a magnificent scene, it was actually worth it to spend a lifetime here to see it. Think about it, countless people in her world could only watch Wei Su's satellite rumble across the sky from a very far distance in the night sky, but she was standing here, as if she could touch it. She could also clearly see the changes of those patterns. It's really so beautiful. Yun Nuoshing felt that the grip on her arm loosened a little. She could not help but tilt her head to look at her. Relaxed a little? Yeah. Qing Lei suddenly became a little indifferent and carefree. It was the kind of indifference that made her feel at home. To be able to see such a scene with my own eyes. Actually, my life is not in vain, I can your head. Yun Nuoshing fiercely rolled her eyes. I have already said it many times. I will say it again now, you will not die. This is just child's play to us. If you want to see that Wei Su up close, we can let you see as much as you want. Qing Lei blinked her eyes and suddenly smiled slyly. Big sister has said it many times. It seems like you really are not lying to me. When have I ever lied to you, big sister? Are you a god? Qing Lei's faint laughter made Yun Nuoshing and the little angel feel their hearts skip a beat. Then, they heard her continue. I feel that using ancient information or something like that can no longer explain it, because all of this has exceeded all of my knowledge. Even the life of the previous generation would not have such an exaggerated performance. So, you thought of what your teacher said about the so-called God? Yun Nuoshing's expression was indescribable for a moment. Do you know what a god is? I don't know. I have said these 3 words many times today. I don't know anything, big sister. Qing Lei smiled foolishly. Don't you think that that kind of thing is just an imaginary existence because it is impossible to explain it with human strength? Yun Nuoshing teased and crossed her arms. Because you can't control it, you can't understand it at all. After thinking hard, you can't come up with anything. It is an omnipotent thing that your teacher calls a god. Qing Lei just smiled and did not continue this topic. Yun Nuoshing also did not say more. Anyway, there was nothing to care about. What they had done today had long exceeded the scope of what mortals could understand. It was actually nothing for Qing Lei to think so. The sky was slightly brighter. Previously, it was like the morning sun, but now it was like the morning sun in the sky. Yun Nuoshing could feel that an extremely hot object was approaching them at an extremely fast speed. They were rapidly colliding with that object. There was still some time before the scheduled trip around the sun. Taking advantage of the fact that this shadow continent had not returned to its melted state, they had to look for it carefully. If there was something there, the three people stopped on this hill for a while and looked up at the huge sphere. They watched the huge red and yellow storm inside roll out extremely far away, so far that the lines on the surface of the planet had obvious changes. Only then did they walk further away. The destination was just an illusion. Whether there was anything on this dark shadow continent. No, even if there was something there, as long as they thought about its trajectory, they probably would not think that something that once existed could still be left behind. After walking for 4 to 5 miles, they could not find anything. As far as the eye could see, other than the black solidified scorched earth, there were only those strange grayish-white mountain ranges and cracks everywhere. These were scars caused by multiple strong earthquakes. Those grayish-white areas seemed to be places with lower temperatures. This dark continent had a more obvious dividing line. On the black side there was a melted, scorched earth. After passing through a series of cracks, it transitioned to the grayish-white area, which was milder. Even though the large planet behind them had already released some light and heat, this grayish-white area was still milder. Yun Nuoshing stood at the rift valley where the gray-white and black regions intersected. He turned to look at the huge planet behind him and was silent for a moment. He was very concerned about that planet because of the power of divine death. He could now clearly feel the energy of those planets from the stars. Indeed, it was a little similar to the elements of chaos and the abyssal death shroud. As the planet's overall temperature rose, the presence became a little more concentrated, but it was still lazy and did not have any destructive power to speak of. He had thought that there would be some special change. "Ah, in front, over there," Qing Lei exclaimed softly, causing Yun Nuoshing to turn his head. Under the hazy starry sky, there was barely enough light now. Looking down from the mountain range that stood by the rift valley, they could see that there was something not quite normal in the distance. The shadow of the mountain range appeared a little different in the faint changes in their line of sight. The fourth order seemed to have found something. The shocking discovery made Qing Lei exclaim again, almost forgetting that they were still in a very dangerous situation. "Big sister, let's go and take a look. Let's go and take a look." Yun Nuoshing nodded and pulled her. With a light leap, they easily crossed a large distance, crossing the rift valley and the mountain range. The little angel was a little faster than them. With a flap of her wings, her figure had already appeared in the strange shadow. What reflected in her golden eyes was a pile of rubble, a dilapidated ruin hidden in the rubble, with dilapidated fences and broken walls. Gravel and sand were everywhere. This was a huge ruin, accompanied by gravel and rift valley. 4 long, crooked rifts gathered around this ruin, cutting it into an isolated island. At the edge of the ruin and rift valley, there were fragments and traces of buildings. It could be inferred that when these rifts surrounded this ruin, they also took away part of the original body. The shadow continent, the broken dark continent, was full of desolation. The unknown fragments on the ground seemed to be telling something to someone, sorrowful and desolate. This place was particularly dark and quiet. Her gaze swept across the remaining building fragments. The little angel felt that there should have been a rather magnificent scene here, but now, no matter what had happened in the past, what was left was only a desolate scene. This was an isolated island of ruins that occupied a very wide area. It was an irregular pentagonal island. The few rifts divided it into dangerous buildings standing on top of stone towers. The rocks below had become thinner and thinner as the rift valley collapsed, and it would collapse at any time. In the end, it would be completely buried under this dark continent and disappear completely. The last words of the ghosts of the past would also be sealed with the dust of history. "How is it? What did you see?" Yun Nuoshing pulled Qing Lei to the side of the little angel, and asked casually. She also saw the huge ruins in front of her, and couldn't help but frown. "Ha, big sister, there really was life on this shadow continent, and it should be different from all the life we know. The architectural style is also different." Qing Lei suddenly forgot her faint fear and happily pulled Yun Nuoxing's hand and swung it back and forth. Yun Nuoxing pondered for a moment but then frowned. How can you be sure? Don't forget that part of the architectural style on the continent comes from the Lost Clan. In the speculation you mentioned the day before yesterday, one of them said that this shadow continent was the origin of life on that continent. You said it yourself. Qing Lei's face stiffened, and she scratched her head awkwardly. Now that big sister said it like that, it seems to be true. Don't be in a hurry to come to a conclusion and make too many guesses. That will only mislead you. Yun Nuoxing shook her head helplessly. The dead ancient city had not welcomed guests for many years. At this moment, Yun Nuoxing and the other two people stepped lightly on the ground, and the rubble that covered the ground made a crunching sound. The sound did not spread very far, perhaps there was no sound at all, and it was only a little sound that was produced within the range of the order barrier. The three people casually walked into the ancient city, passing through a collapsed palace and buildings, and passing through a broken tower that was more than 10 meters high. This city was filled with a faint desolate aura, as if there were countless souls hovering here. Any slight sound that was made was a faint whisper that was attached to Yun Nuoxing and the others' ears. It's completely different from the lost ruins. The layout and the decorations of the buildings, there are some traces that have not been completely obliterated. Big sister, look at this wall. Qing Lei pulled Yun Nuoxing to a wall that still had half of it left. He speculated that it might have been a magnificent building that was hundreds of meters tall that stood in front of them. Looking at the collapsed ruins, the waste stones, and the traces of decorations at the corners, he felt that it should have been a palace, a majestic palace. Immediately, he thought of the realm of the gods, and when the realm of the gods was mentioned, it would naturally be associated with the gods. In that case, Qing Lei's teacher had once mentioned the gods and the shadow continent. Could it be that it was actually not a joke? Your teacher might be a very, very mysterious guy. He suddenly said a sentence without rhyme or reason, causing Qing Lei to turn her head with a confused expression. Big sister, what did you just say? I said, your teacher might be a very powerful guy. Yun Nuoxing repeated it again. He knew that the continent had nothing to do with God. No God had appeared, and it had not been distorted or unconsciously changed by high divinity life forms. However, her teacher was suddenly involved in this aspect, which made people extremely suspicious of whether he actually knew something. Perhaps something had indeed fallen into the shadow continent, and then it was coincidentally discovered by the great explorer-scholar who had traveled all his life. In the end, he made such an inference. But Yun Nuoxing did not say anything. Instead, Yun Nuoxing repeated it again. This pentagonal island was very wide, but there were not many things that were actually useful left behind, or even none at all. This ancient city showed signs of being eroded by high temperature, and the walls had melted, like a stone-like object after a liquid solidified. Given that the shadow continent was located in such an awkward position, Yun Nuoxing had every reason to believe that even this gray-white area had definitely been directly illuminated by the sun, that is, the light of Wei Su. It did not evaporate completely at once, so maybe it was not directly illuminated by the sun or something. Well, to be serious, he felt that there should be something like a barrier here, but there was no energy now. But it shouldn't be that there was no energy just because they came here. Maybe it was the life that once existed here that made the building very sturdy. After walking 2 laps around the ancient ruins of the ancient city, Yun Nuoxing and the others strolled slowly to the center of the city. This was a huge square that was empty. There were no buildings within a radius of 1,000 meters, only a huge square paved with curved stone brick. Some parts of the square were even covered with holes. Looking at the remaining fragments in the square, Yun Nuoxing felt that those holes might be where some huge pillars had been placed. Some pillars with a diameter of 5 meters might be related to this square, then. he saw a flat pattern engraved on the ground in the center of the square. His eyes immediately widened. Chapter 12:33. The picture engraved on the ground was vivid and lifelike. Yun Nuoxing felt that it was very familiar. It was so familiar that he shuddered. The edges, the appearance, the thing, the little angel looked at the huge object drawn on the ground. She blinked her eyes, but she didn't feel much. That is it seems to be an altar. Altar. She was stunned for a moment. Then, an idea flashed in her mind. A few days ago, they rushed into this strange and unpredictable place to look for an altar. In the end, they didn't find the altar. They even went to another world to play. Now, she suddenly saw the engraving of an altar in this dark shadow continent. No matter how she thought about it, she felt that something was wrong. She tilted her head and looked at Yun Nuoxing. She saw that he was also shocked. Her guess was confirmed. But she still couldn't help but ask, "Is this the thing?" Yun Nuoxing nodded gently. He had seen it once. It was a picture he saw from someone's memory dozens of eras later. It was a mysterious altar swaying in the depths of the void. Every line was wrapped in a strange aura. It was the engraving he saw in front of him. He couldn't be wrong. He couldn't remember it wrong. "Big sister, this is the altar." Qing Lei suddenly grabbed Yun Nuoxing's sleeve and jumped up excitedly. The gravity here was too small. She almost pulled Yun Nuoxing out with her jump. The latter quickly changed the rules in the order barrier. Then, the two of them stabilized. "What altar?" Yun Nuoxing saw that she seemed to know something. He couldn't help but be stunned. He quickly asked, "It's that. It seemed that seeing this thing had a big impact on her. Qing Lei opened her mouth and shouted for a long time. She was sweating and biting her tongue. She couldn't say what it was. Seeing that she was more anxious than him after jumping up and down for a long time, Yun Nuoxing shook his head helplessly. He put his hands on her shoulders and sighed softly. "Stop. Don't worry. Come, look into my eyes. Now, slowly relax. Relax. That's right. I'm not asking you to fall asleep. Ahem, slow down. Calm down." Yun Nuoxing induced her to calm down. The little angel crossed the order barrier and flew around in boredom. This huge, empty square seemed to be engraved with such a painting. Other than that, there was nothing else. As for the outside of the square, there was a circle of buildings that seemed to have been weathered. There were traces of weathering everywhere. This shadow continent must have once existed in a place with air. Otherwise, how could there be such traces? As for why it became like this, there were many answers. Maybe it was dug out, or maybe that place was blown up. This shadow continent was the only remaining fragment. Judging from the fragmented appearance of the shadow continent, it felt that this should be the answer. The fluorescent slender hand gently touched the grayish-white half of the wall, touching the broken cracks. With a gentle touch, a part of it shattered and floated in the surrounding space. It didn't fall down, only a slightly bigger piece fell to the ground. The origin altar? Yun Nuoxing was stunned. "Is this the legend of your world, Ahem? The legend of this season or the legend of the last season?" The little angel seemed to have heard Qing Lei's words, especially the name, which made it very concerned. She quickly flapped her wings and flew back into the order barrier. "You remember now?" Qing Lei nodded and said, "It's a very old legend. For this world, many legends are very old. No matter how many legends there are, it's not surprising. Even if this legend came from the creation of the world, there were people who believed in it before the birth of the world. The people who said it didn't think about how they knew the scene before the creation of the world. Ahem, what I mean is, the legend about the origin altar all came from a very, very old time. It's an ancient legend from the last season. It's ancient to them, not to us. The world where Qing Lei and the others came from had an unimaginable number of legends. There were all kinds of legends, big and small. If you really asked someone to tell them, that person would be able to say it clearly and logically. Moreover, there weren't many versions. It was as if everyone agreed on one or a few legends that didn't deviate too much. The whole world knew about it, and it wouldn't be unknown just because of the distance. This origin altar was one of them, and it was only one version. It was passed down from the ancient era, and it was still widely known. It was so widely known that Qing Lei didn't pay much attention to it. Even when she saw it, it took her a while to remember it. It was as if something had become something that everyone was familiar with. Although no one had seen the so-called origin altar, everyone seemed to be familiar with it and could even describe the appearance of the altar. A very, very long time ago, probably referring to the ancient era of the last season of life. This is also the reason why the teacher said that there might be a previous season of life before the last season of life. When the world was created, for some reason, the world itself had problems. Yun Nuoxing was speechless. Her cheeks couldn't help but twitch. What do you mean by this and that and that? I don't know either. Qing Lei shrugged cutely. That's a very, very ancient thing. Even the language translation wasn't very smooth. We don't know much about the language of the previous season of life. As for the more ancient, oh yes, speaking of the more ancient, the legend of the origin altar refers to the ancient era of the previous season. They mentioned that they couldn't get the specific information because of the language barrier. The information that was passed down to the later generations were things that they understood with their own method. In other words, Yun Nuoxing pinched her chin with her right hand and wrapped her left hand around her right arm. For the people of the previous season, the origin altar, that was passed down from an even more ancient era, did not belong to them. It came from an even stranger place or time. Therefore, the people of the previous season speculated that the previous season of life was related to the previous season of life, and linked it to the altar. Is that right? Yes, that's what it means. Qing Lei nodded. After thinking for a while, she continued, well, then, in the process of their research, they found that and that's a problem. The problem originated from the origin altar itself. Maybe they got something from the origin altar, or they learned some special information, but they couldn't decipher it or even understand it. They could only rigidly copy it, or even imprint the things that may or may not be words, and then pass it down from generation to generation. Speaking of this, Qing Lei couldn't help but smile. Big Sister often sees some strange symbols on the buildings in Zhuguang City. Not only explorers, but also some merchants who travel around, some ordinary people who travel far away, fishermen who go out to sea, small businessmen who open shops. They definitely have these things in their homes. It's just like some prayer symbols that have existed from ancient times until today. In fact, those symbols were passed down from that and that, but many of them were artificially changed. Because they didn't understand it at all, because they couldn't understand it at all. Last season, when they found more ancient information, they could only copy it down. Whether it was useful or not, whether it referred to something or not, they just drew it down, stroke by stroke, unchanged. The that and that I said were just transliterations. Of course, as time passed, the correct pronunciation of the transliteration may have changed, so even the words that it referred to became these few words. Yun Nuoxing suddenly realized when he heard this. So the that and that she said were used to refer to the special name of the altar. He thought that she was struggling to say for a long time and couldn't twist the words into this shape. What do you think? It flew over and glanced at him, saying, ancient times, even more ancient times. It's not easy to reverse the transliteration and symbols that have been changed, but we can't just stop here, can we? Yun Nuoxing shook his head. He hadn't given up yet, so he said, Qing Lei, do you know those two sentences? If you know. Qing Lei smiled. Big Sister, I said it's a well-known. Oh, this is a little exaggerated. Anyway, it's something that scholars and people with some knowledge know. Ahem. Anyway, I don't know about this. I'm the kind of guy who shuts the door and windows and doesn't care about what happens outside. Yun Nuoxing blushed. Qing Lei looked at him with a smile and did not say anything. She nodded and squatted down on the grayish-white ground that was about to turn into sand. She used a small knife to carve one character after another, something that looked like a character. When she dropped the knife to carve the first complete character, Yun Nuoxing's expression changed drastically. In fact, when he was halfway through writing, his breathing became slightly disordered. He recognized this character, even when she was only halfway through writing. He could recognize it and guess it. That's, Little Angel also opened his eyes wide in shock. Those were words from the mythological era. It couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be wrong. Yun Nuoxing was also in a state of shock. He couldn't be wrong. If the memories that Yun Nuoxing inherited were flawed and wrong, then the owner of those memories. He couldn't be wrong. Yun Nuoxing and Yun Nuoxing looked at each other. Then, they nervously moved closer and watched as Qing Lei wrote the words one by one. When a line of words appeared, the two's breathing quickened. It was indeed the words of the kamikaze era, but this thing can't be read. Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but say, "It's like a child who just started learning how to speak and write." Runes. Runes from the mythological era were written correctly. Yes, they were written neatly. They could even recognize each word, but they could not connect the words together. In short, I can understand every word you say. But when you put all the words together, I don't know what you're talking about. Little Angel said concisely. Yun Nuoxing smiled bitterly from the bottom of his heart. He really knew every word, but he couldn't say the words out loud. Each word existed by itself, and he couldn't understand what it was trying to say. As Qing Lei wrote diligently and seriously, Yun Nuoxing noticed a small detail. When she was about to finish washing a word, she would quickly stop writing when she was about to stop. Then, she would use her thumb to rub off a little bit as if she was adjusting or changing it. Then, she would start writing the next word. Qing Lei, you deliberately erased a word from a word. Why? Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but ask. Qing Lei stopped and shrugged helplessly. Because I can't write it out, big sister. It's said that these words are cursed. They are words and languages that are bound by some powerful rules. No matter how it is spoken or written, the world will respond accordingly. It's said that there was once a person who didn't listen to the advice and was struck to death by a bolt of lightning. When the words of the gods exist, they will take effect immediately. Yun Nuoxing and Little Angel were not surprised by this characteristic, because if it was really the words of the gods, as long as it was the words of the gods, it would have the effect of law. Even at their level, as long as they said it in their hearts, it would take effect. If it was more special, anyway, anything was possible. But the two people looked at each other, and then lowered their heads at the same time to look at Qing Lei, who was seriously writing there. A wave of sadness and confusion surged in their hearts at the same time. But would such a strange sentence really have any effect? If it really had an effect, it would be too powerful. These words were like a dozen words that were extracted from some sentences. Even if they were mixed up and reorganized, it wouldn't be useful information. Could this thing trigger the words of the gods? Oh no! Qing Lei suddenly screamed loudly. She finished the last stroke of one of the characters in her hand. At that moment it was like spring had come to 1,000 trees, and the ice and snow had welcomed the sun. The beginning of something was being born. The one who felt it the most directly was Yun Nuoxing. He directly felt that in a distant place in the starry sky, there was suddenly a huge distortion force that could turn the world upside down. It was so huge that it could tear this star field apart. It was nothing to him, but there were other people here. If they tried to stop or resist it, the resulting energy shockwaves might shock Qing Lei to death. Then, the only result would be carrying her and running away. He was just about to put it into action when the crazy and distorted force disappeared completely in an instant. It was as if it had just appeared to say hello. It was so fast that he almost collapsed. He turned to look at the instigator of what had just happened. He saw that Qing Lei was so excited that she slapped the last character engraved on the ground and scattered most of it. Only then did the strange energy suddenly disappear. In fact, Yun Nuoxing felt that the energy actually disappeared because the character had disappeared. It could not find the place to aim at, so it had no choice but to disappear. Phew, that was close. Fortunately, I was fast enough to erase it. Speaking of which, I am in the starry sky. I don't think I will be struck by lightning. Why are you so worried? Qing Lei shook her head helplessly and buried her head in the ground again. Yun Nuoxing and the little angel looked at each other and could not help but smile bitterly. If it were not for the fact that the little girl did not have divine power or the power of a god, the half-completed sentence just now would have directly followed the rules and blasted here. According to what he sensed just now, Yun Nuoxing estimated that the energy should have destroyed this star system tens of millions of times. Although he did not know what the sentence meant, from this point of view, it might be related to attack, destruction, or something else. Maybe he only saw half of it. Well, I'm done. But every character has been erased by me a little bit. There won't be a problem this time. After Qing Lei finished writing, she threw away the broken tiles she found in her hand, stood up and laughed with her chest out. She seemed to have forgotten the current situation. Yun Nuoxing and the little angel went over to take a look. After reading it, they shook their heads. It was still not working. They could not understand the meaning of these two sentences at all. They had a feeling that was called, I know every word when it is taken apart, but I don't know what it means when it is put together. The two people had such a feeling at this time. They looked at the words that they could distinguish one by one, but they were confused and did not know what it was saying at all. Who knew what kind of message that ancient altar left behind? Qing Lei, are you sure it's these words? Yun Nuoxing could not help but laugh dryly. Yes, it's like this. Qing Lei nodded. When she saw that Yun Nuoxing and the people were a little embarrassed, she could not help but laugh evilly. She used her elbow to poke Yun Nuoxing's arm and said, You can't understand it, right? You can't understand it, right? Hee, because we can't understand it, this thing has been left aside. For thousands of years, it was just a legend that almost everyone knew, but no one really tried to understand it because nothing could be found. She paused for a moment and laughed dryly. Of course, it's also possible that someone actually tried to study it but was struck to death by lightning. Being a scholar is actually a high-risk profession. No one will know if you die unknowingly. If you let your corpse lie in every corner, you might have gone crazy and died, or you might have been played to death by yourself. She said with a look of regret, as if she had already seen those guys who died while playing with the language of the gods. Yun Nuoxing and the people were dumbfounded. But it did not matter. As long as they went against their conscience, they could say that they did not care about the information. It was not that they did not discover anything. At least they could tell that this mysterious altar of nothingness, this mysterious altar of origin, was related to the mythological era. This thing was not simple. Oh, this was nonsense. How many things related to the mythological era were simple? Then what should we do now? It asked softly. Yun Nuoxing frowned and looked at Qing Lei, who was still looking at the runes he had carved with great interest. He said, Qing Lei, do you know where this altar is? I don't know. No one has seen it before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a legend. Qing Lei shook her head with a smile. The answer that he had expected made Yun Nuoxing a little depressed. It was not easy to come here, and he seemed to have found some clues. But now, he had to give up so easily. According to the characteristics of that strange altar, it was not easy for him to find a chance to get close to it, but he could not get any substantial result. It was very likely that this opportunity would slip away. With the characteristics of the altar, it was completely possible for it to lead the masters of the gods to escape from the void. This world, this starry sky, this galaxy must be. Perhaps it was related to that altar. But as to how it was related, he really did not know. Then, what should we do now? Seeing that he did not speak, the little angel asked again. Yun Nuoshing pressed his palm on his face and rubbed it hard. After a while, he let out a long breath and faced the little angel with a face full of joy. Explode, right? A certain dumbfounded fake little angel was stunned. Chapter 12:34. If he couldn't make a decision, he would first take a look. If he still couldn't make a decision, then he would just blow something up. As for what to blow up, how to blow it up, and how it would turn into it was really hard to say. He hadn't thought about it in detail. Anyway, first, he had to do something. It wasn't a good idea to just look at this strange altar engraved here. Instead of waiting anxiously, he might as well take action. For example, he could blow something up. Some mechanisms were also triggered in such a strange way. If he blew it up, he might be able to find something unexpected. Then, a certain destructive maniac would also be ready to blow it up. The energy was already condensing. Wait a minute! The fake little angel exclaimed. She quickly jumped over and pressed down his raised hand. She glanced at Qing Lei, who didn't react at all. She heaved a sigh of relief. You little rascal, blow up this place or something, she stammered for a while. After a while, she said, what if the clue is here but you blew it up by mistake? Wouldn't we have come here for nothing? Then we'll talk about it after we destroy it. Yun Nuoshing frowned fiercely. She raised her other hand. A dark and chaotic energy crazily condensed. Then, it was pressed down by the little angel again. It's not that I want to say this, but anyway, it's this world, right? We're the ones who are most worried about it. I don't believe that it won't come out. Yun Nuoshing's eyes widened. She was about to break free from her grip and continue condensing energy when Qing Lei suddenly realized or thought of something. She jumped up excitedly. Big sister. Then, as soon as she turned her head, she saw Yun Nuoshing and the little angel entangled together in an extremely ambiguous position. Their faces were close to each other, and lilies bloomed one after another. In an instant, her pretty face flushed with excitement. She quickly covered her sparkling eyes with both hands. Hearing the sound, the two people turned their heads together. When they saw Qing Lei's strange action, they were stunned. The two people looked at each other and quickly let go of their hand. Ahem, what's wrong? Did you remember something or discover something? Yun Nuoshing coughed dryly and hurriedly went forward to greet her. Qing Lei covered her face with both hands, looking like she didn't see anything. When she saw Yun Nuoshing walking over, she chuckled. Big sister, hee. I just remembered something. It's about the altar of origins. Yun Nuoshing looked at her curiously and didn't ask any questions. She just waited quietly for her to speak. After pondering for a while, she said, if I'm not mistaken, there should be 2 altars of origin. 2? Yun Nuoshing was stunned. What's the other one for? No, speaking of which, what are these 2 altars for? You don't know. We don't have any faith, and we don't have an object of worship. What is this altar of origins used for? Qing Lei shook her head. I don't know either. 2 altars. Yes, that's what the legend says. However, we don't know what exactly is going on or who passed it down. We only know that they have appeared since ancient times. Let me think. I should remember the origin of the legend. Yun Nuoshing waited patiently, but before Qing Lei could think of a reason, the entire dark and grayish-white land suddenly trembled, causing the 3 of them to tremble. Suddenly, they felt that the light in the sky had become unusually bright. They turned around abruptly, only to see a huge corona suddenly appear in front of them. It was a huge sun, a sun formed by the remains of the sun. It was smaller than a planet, but it retained most of the original sun's weight. The light that was extremely fatal to mortals shone on the satellite in front of the shadow continent. The satellite of Wei Su had blocked most of the fatal light. Even though Yun Nuoshing jokingly called it the remains of the sun, it still had enough light and heat. Its light could directly blind most of the living beings. However, with the existence of the order barrier, Qing Lei saw this scene directly. Her eyes widened. This shocking scene was instantly branded in her eyes and could no longer be erased. The remains of the sun, Wei Su's satellite, and the shadow continent. The three of them were connected together in a line. Standing on the shadow continent, they could see the satellite being burned by the light of Wei Su. The huge gravitational force was enough to distort time and pull it towards Wei Su. The entire satellite was burning with brilliant fireworks. Looking from this angle, the brilliant sea of fire of Wei Su's starry corona had a huge sense of oppression. It was as if it was going to swallow them together with the huge planet. So beautiful. Qing Lei could not help but murmur. The light that was enough to blind almost all living beings was filtered by the order barrier, allowing her to easily see it without being hurt. She called this shocking and even terrifying scene beautiful. It inexplicably made Yun Nuoshing a little happy and proud. She could not help but mutter, "This is a scene that ordinary people can't see. It exists in the starry sky. There are countless such scenes in the entire starry sky. They burn alone in the deep and dark starry sky. No one can see them. You are a lucky one." Qing Lei stared blankly at this scene. She did not even have the time to speak. She watched the huge satellite of Wei Su in front of her distort in her sight. Its surface became unrecognizable. The scorching sunlight even changed the storm. Its shape had turned into an oval. The high arched end was facing the sun, dragging a long trail of golden flames. It seemed that it would fall into the brilliant sea of fire at any time. The speed of movement of this planet and this continent is too strange. The little angel quietly floated to Yun Nuoshing's side and whispered in his ear. Just now, it was still sweeping across the starry sky at an extremely high speed. Then, when it came to this place, it suddenly slowed down. It feels like it was hurrying across the starry sky just to rush back to this place. Yun Nuoshing casually replied. Then, he asked, "Is there any reaction from the power of Divine Destroyer on that planet?" No, you can say that there is." Just as he shook his head, he was stunned. Then, he helplessly sighed and said, "The power of Divine Destroyer on that planet has all quieted down." It had just quieted down. The moment the sun shone on it, it restrained all of its presence. Now, anyone who looks at it will only see a red storm. Even I can't feel the slightest bit of the power of Divine Destroyer. Yun Nuoshing was stunned. Restrained? What do you mean by restrained? I don't know. Don't ask me. I also want to know. Anyway, this is how it is. It can't be helped whether you believe it or not. The little angel shook his head helplessly. The three of them stood side by side and looked at this gorgeous and extremely spectacular scene. Now, the satellite of Wei Su was moving very slowly. It was so slow that it was very deliberate. It was so slow that it was very strange. Just like what it said, it was as if it had deliberately rushed back from the starry sky. Like a timid child, it shrank in its cradle and shivered. Even if it would be devoured by the flames, it did not have a second choice. This shadow continent is very lucky. Originally, according to the speed of Wei Su and the continent's own speed, the shadow continent would be directly exposed to the sun. It would be in a position closer to the sun than Wei Su. But now it has almost completely stopped. If the shadow continent rotates according to this trace, it will definitely not face the fatal sun directly. As the little angel spoke, it cast its gaze on the grayish-white land, and then looked inside, the black land. The sun shone its blazing light on its satellite. The latter received such a huge amount of sunlight that it almost ignited, turning into a second giant sun in the starry sky. It also spread a part of the heat and scattered it on the shadowland. The black land should have been an extremely solid land. At this moment, when the second star blocked the light, it also received a huge amount of light. The heat was enough to melt the dark land. This black land is probably going to melt, probably because of the black color. Yun Nuoshing pointed to the black land in the distance, the side closest to the sun. And we happen to be in the grayish-white area behind it. It won't be too hot and the land won't melt. Otherwise, this ancient city wouldn't have been preserved. Well, it's the light. I can't see anything. Qing Lei looked for a while and felt pain in her eyes. She rubbed her eyes and quickly squatted down. Yun Nuoshing heard and couldn't help but shake his head. What else do you want to see? This is the place closest to Wei Su. We, it and you, are the first discoverers of this place. After that, he couldn't help but tease. By the way, if you remember this scene and bring it back, it might attract the attention of others. If you want to show off, you have to find something more impressive, right? The little angel couldn't help but roll her eyes. This guy was fooling her again. Not to mention the things here. Even if Qing Lei ran back and told them, would anyone believe her? Would anyone admit it? Probably not. Yun Nuoshing suddenly paused and quickly narrowed his eyes. His eyes glinted with divine light as he looked towards the direction of the huge planet. That huge planet filled with countless gases had come here at an uncanny speed, sheltering the shadow continent with a strange angle and gravity. Now the blazing light shone into the interior of the planet, and the long red and black light that stretched out represented the remnant sun devouring its own satellite. At that moment the extreme storm suddenly changed. On the side of the planet facing them, the huge storm became much thinner, as if the storm was gradually stopping. However, if one looked closely, they would find that something was not right. The color at the edge of the storm was still abnormally thick and exaggerated. The wind was still blowing over the planet, and it was a vast storm that blew from the planet's core to its surface. At that moment, all of them were gathering towards the other side. The storm that had covered the entire planet was now gathering towards the side directly illuminated by the sun, becoming an even more exaggerated and terrifying storm that encompassed the entire hemisphere. If a storm of this scale were to be placed in the divine realm, it could probably destroy an entire large city in minutes. Of course, that was if the city's defensive circle was not activated. The storm on the planet's surface seemed to have melted completely. The melted liquid flowed in one direction, condensing and solidifying into an even bigger storm that resisted the sunlight from the other side. However, the layer of red and gold flames did not show any signs of weakening, as if a huge energy barrier had enveloped the entire planet. Under such circumstances, it did look like an energy barrier, and any normal person who came into contact with it would definitely die. Nonsense. If it were a normal person, they would have been burned into gas by the sun when the planet brought them here. Boom! A dull and restless sound came from the ground beneath their feet and traveled through their soles to every part of their body. Yun Nuoshing's body trembled slightly before stabilizing, and he still had the strength to reach out and support Qing Lei, who was almost sent flying by the shock. What's wrong now? She looked around nervously and could not help but gulp, and her grip on Yun Nuoshing's arm tightened slightly. If you ask me, I can give you an answer. I just don't think you'll like it. Yun Nuoshing raised his head and let out a stiff ah. After a long while, he stretched out a finger and pointed at the ground beneath his feet. He smiled slightly and said, "The shadow continent under our feet seems to be falling into it." Qing Lei glanced at the grayish-white ground, and then looked at the approaching satellite of Wei Su. She knew what he said was true. She forced a smile and suddenly fainted. Wei Su's satellite was very close to its home planet at this moment. Coupled with the layer of light that was attracted by the huge gravitational force, it could be said that the layer of light was Wei Su's star corona. The moment it fell into it, it would probably be killed by the temperature there. The modified version of the sun. The modified version means that it has been processed. It's not that there's anything extra. It was originally just a sun, but one day it suddenly exploded into countless pieces with a bang. The fragments and the energy were thrown into the starry sky, and all that was left was a very dense remnant. But this remnant used some unknown method to swallow the remnant of the previous sun, and became the remnant sun that we see now. The little angel said as she twirled her slender fingers. I know about this. Why are you telling me about this? Yun Nuoshing was stunned. I know that you know about it. It shook its head helplessly, stretched out a finger and pointed at his arms and said, but this little girl doesn't know about it. Yun Nuoshing hurriedly lowered his head and saw that Qing Lei had already fainted. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This little girl was really amazing. In just one day, she had seen many things that were beyond the limit of her knowledge. If it were anyone else, they would have probably gone crazy when they landed on the Shadow Continent and found out where this place was. But she could still hold on until now and only fainted. It had to be said that her spirit was really abnormally strong. Rumble, a roar came from the star field that was supposed to be silent. It was the sound of a riot that came from the Shadow Continent as it crushed the space. It was like a flagship of a fleet, using the sharp side as a charging horn. Under unreasonable acceleration, it rumbled and rushed toward the huge planet that was burned into an orange color, and the storm gradually subsided. The huge vibration made Yun Nuoshing and the little angel almost lose their balance. It's simply messing around. Yun Nuoshing hurriedly sat down and couldn't help but say, with such a sudden and violent acceleration, if it were any other continent, it would have been smashed to pieces. The front, middle, and back parts would first be separated, then disintegrate and fall apart. It looks like it's going to rush in. As soon as Yun Nuoshing's voice trailed off, the Shadow Continent dived toward Wei Su's satellite with an acceleration and speed that were beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. The tip of the Shadow Continent suddenly touched the layer of flames that had been absorbed. Suddenly, the entire Shadow Continent and the countless fragments around it were wrapped in a layer of flames of the same color. It was as if it had suddenly plunged into the sun. The dazzling light in all directions was dazzling, and if one looked at it for a long time, they would be blinded. At the same time, they were greeted by a heat wave that could burn the entire planet into a beautiful carboniferous object. Qing Lei woke up in a daze. When she saw the orange-red scene in front of her and the huge sun slowly descending, she immediately knew where she had rushed into. Her head tilted and she fainted again. Yun Nuoshing felt that the girl was really unconscious this time. This was actually good news. God knew why such a thing suddenly happened, but since it had happened, it was useless to pursue it. Adhering to the mentality of taking things as they came, Yun Nuoshing had long been mentally prepared. When he rushed into this damned Yongdan realm, he was already mentally prepared to fight to the death with an army of 10 billion, although when he rushed in, he saw an even more terrifying scene. In short, he had always been in a state of readiness. He had long been prepared to blow up something, or be blown up by something. Within a few minutes, the Shadow Continent had rushed into the atmosphere of the Vesuvius satellite. All that could be seen were red and orange hues. The storm had disappeared, and in its place was a solid land. I've really seen a ghost this time. Yun Nuoshing's cheeks twitched. With a calm smile on his face, he said, a solidified land suddenly appeared on a planet full of strange gases and the power of divine destruction. Are you kidding me? The little angel glanced at him and shook her head helplessly. It was no wonder that he was so agitated. When they were so close, they had already taken a look at the strange satellite. Indeed, other than the storm and the gas mixed with the weak power of divine destruction, there was only a scorching liquid core in the center that was heated by the light of Wei Su. Then, when they rushed in, they saw a solidified land, as if a land created by storms and magma raging for countless years. That was a little too fake. But that was the truth. In fact, in their perception, the land was real and not an illusion. But if they were to look at the time a few dozen minutes ago, the situation inside the planet that they sensed could not be fake. So, the truth could only be, anyway, something must have gone wrong after this strange satellite rushed to Mother's side. Yun Nuoshing carried Qing Lei on his back and shrugged. I'm used to this kind of thing. It's okay, it can't scare me. Even if that remnant sun called Wei Su suddenly exploded with a bang, I won't show the slightest bit of surprise. The little angel looked at him and suddenly sighed and shook her head helplessly. This person's mouth. Sooner or later, he would say something big. Chapter 1236. The orange-red land stretched as far as the eye could see. There were barren mountains everywhere, and the sky was a warm orange-red color. It was the light of death emitted by a remnant sun. It was still warm, repeating the passion of tens of thousands of years ago or even hundreds of millions of years ago. The orange-red light dyed the land in this color. However, perhaps this land of death was originally this color, and the orange light was just an illusion. There was a violent storm in the sky, disturbing the atmosphere and connecting the heaven and earth. Even the earth was trembling. The wind that blew made the sky and earth blurry, constantly driving away the wandering travelers in the distance. However, they seemed to be completely unaware of this chase. Their footsteps were sometimes fast and sometimes slow. The blurry, hazy storm was also sometimes fast and sometimes slow. It was like a cat playing with a mouse. It seemed that the storm did not dare to push too hard, and had no choice but to maintain a subtle distance. Big sister, although I don't quite understand, looking at your expression, you don't seem to be very happy? A sweet voice with a little liveliness and a hint of caution sounded in his ears. Yun Nuoshing turned his head and looked. Qing Lei was looking at him carefully. She could not help but use more strength in her hand to grab his arm. After walking on this orange-red land for a long time, the storm continued to gather behind them. The wind blew in their faces, and they rolled and fought in some places. Her adventurer's outfit had long been stained with orange-red dust. Her face was also white and red. There was an unconcealable tiredness and weariness on her face, but she was still holding on. Her footsteps were already a little shaky. She had to hold on to his hand to continue walking. Yun Nuoshing had proposed to carry her on his back. Anyway, with his strength, carrying a person was no different from carrying a planet. Of course, this did not mean that Qing Lei's weight was equivalent to a planet. Anyway, that was what it meant. They had been walking on this land of red soil and red sand for 2 days and 2 nights. At first, Qing Lei found that the wind storm could not catch up with them, so she relaxed a little. She took the time to talk to Yun Nuoshing about the interesting things in the past, about her travels on the continent with the big guy and exploring various places. When she told the stories, she did not forget to look at the surrounding environment with a vigilant look. Along the way, there was no exception to the orange-red wilderness. Occasionally, a mountain range would cross in front of her, but it was nothing special. It was just a habit of hers. Even if she had trained her physical strength by running, jumping, and crawling in some strange places all year round, she could not withstand such a long period of non-stop running and hurrying. The few times she rested were in the arms of the floating, luminous sister. It was not particularly long. She had been in a trance for a long time, but she still forced herself to be alert, as if nothing had happened. Yes, it had been 2 days and 2 nights. During this period, the satellite of Wei Su had left the orange-red sea of fire and entered deep into the galaxy. At that time, it would be more than 10 hours of night, and only a faint light shone on the orange-red land. The storm did not stop. If they did not stop, it would not stop either. In a short period of more than 10 hours, the The satellite once again entered the sea of fire and continued to fall in the sea of fire. Yun Nuoshing looked at her tired face and stopped. He said, "I'm fine. There's nothing to be happy about anyway. Naturally I can't smile. But you," when Qing Lei heard him mention her, she could not help but shrink her neck. She then heard him continue, "You've been holding on for a whole day. Fan, how are you going to hold on? Why don't you take a rest first? Eat something and sleep before you continue. You've seen the storm. It has been gathering for 2 days and 2 nights, but it still hasn't blown up. Although it's not to scare people, but if you keep going like this, you'll fall before the wind blows." Qing Lei shook her head stubbornly. Her face was slightly pale. She felt uncomfortable when she stopped. "I'm fine. I can still hold on for a while. Hee, big sister, you guys are the ones who haven't eaten for 2 days. I've eaten everything. What about you guys? There's only a little left," Yun Nuoshing really wanted to say. "If I wasn't afraid of scaring you, I would have enough food in my dimension to feed an entire planet." Huff, huff. Qing Lei stopped to catch her breath. She waved her hand and said, "I'm fine. Let's keep going. Maybe we'll reach, where is it?" She was just trying her best to hold on, just like him at a certain time. She was trying her best to hold on, but she would never fall. She could not fall. He turned his head and looked around. It was a barren land. The color of the land was always monotonous, making people think that it was the only thing in the world. There was no hope at all. The sky was either shrouded in darkness or covered in flames. Qing Lei was no longer afraid of the terrifying flames that could not affect her at all. She was almost numb. She moved her legs numbly and walked forward numbly. She did not know where she was going. She continued to walk forward after she finished speaking. Yun Nuoshing could not help but frown when he saw this. He quickened his pace and picked her up without any explanation. Then, he carried her on his back and snorted softly, "That's enough. Why are you being so stubborn in front of me? Look at your face. You're going to faint soon. Why are you still holding on?" Qing Lei screamed in her heart. She could not even make a sound. She subconsciously lay on his back and held his shoulders with both hands. There was a faint panic in her eyes as she said, "Big sister, but that's enough. Just lie on my back obediently." Yun Nuoshing tilted his head and glared at her. "There are so many people in this world who want to be qualified but don't have it. You should be grateful to me for carrying you on my back once." Qing Lei couldn't help but laugh when she saw that he was pretending to be arrogant, but it was very unnatural. She removed her stubbornness and obediently laid on his back. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered softly, "Big sister's body smells so good." Her breath was like orchids, causing his neck to itch and goosebumps to appear on his skin. Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes and sighed unhappily in his heart. This girl, he didn't know how this mortal's body was able to endure these 2 days and 2 nights that could be said to be completely dark. "Big sister, can we still go back?" "Yes, we will go back. I will bring you back." Yun Nuoshing nodded without thinking. In fact, he had approached that continent twice in these 2 days. He could have directly sent this little girl back. He did not know if he was afraid of scaring the little girl or for some other reason, but he did not do so. There were soft murmurs in her ears. She was talking to herself, and the soft murmurs contained some longing. She still had some thoughts about that world, some regrets, some unfinished business, and some family members that she missed. Perhaps this was the reason that supported her to continue walking down this path. After a few whispers, the little girl finally fainted. Her arms around his neck drooped down weakly. Yun Nuoshing stopped to take a look. Seeing her long hair hanging on his shoulder, he could not help but sigh softly. What do you think this girl is persisting for? Who knows? The luminous big sister, whose feet were off the ground, floated over from the side. She stretched out her slender hand and stroked Qing Lei's long hair. She said, "There is probably something that she cannot give up. There is something that she has to do personally to keep her going. Just like you. Me? Yun Nuoshing was stunned. It turned its head. Its deep golden eyes were shining with an inexplicable light. He did not understand it for a moment. Ever since it became one of his people, it had been imitating their appearance in his memory. Its behavior was 80% similar. Occasionally, he would mistakenly think that it was a little girl who had slipped to his side. At this moment, it was the first time he saw it with another expression. He actually could not understand it. He was also in a daze for a moment. Then, he realized what it meant and could not help but laugh bitterly. He had been reincarnated for dozens of eras. It was as if he had been wandering in the gaps of the void, wandering on the edge of life. He continued to go on without stopping. Until now, he did not know what this life, these countless eras, was all for. He shook his head and did not say anything. He just carried Qing Lei on his back and continued to walk forward. The little angel looked at his back and could not help but murmur, "So, what are you persisting for?" It shook its head and followed him. He probably did not know the answer himself. The red soil covered the sky, and the storm in the distance never stopped. They walked between the heaven and earth without any signs of life. They walked forward aimlessly without any thoughts. They just repeated the action of lifting their feet and putting their feet down. They did not think about anything. This was a test of patience. Yun Nuoshing and the others did not know why it wanted to do this. However, before they saw it, they could only do as it wanted. They did not care about anything else and could not care about anything else. The light in the sky dimmed a little, and the layer of orange flames faded away. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel both stopped and looked up at this scene. A crack appeared in the layer of flame corona from the middle and then retreated to both sides. It was as if a giant ball was drilling out of a huge ocean. The water flowed in all directions from its top. "It's dark." Yun Nuoshing sighed softly. This was the signal that the satellite was far away from the remnant sun. The sky was about to turn dark. He had already seen it twice. There was nothing to be surprised about. The little angel also watched for a while. It unconsciously flapped its white wings. The two of them stopped for a while and were about to continue their long journey. However, the sky suddenly changed. The fiery light came back. The sky was getting brighter and brighter at a speed visible to the naked eye. The orange color was getting darker and darker, gradually turning into dark red, and then into gold. Yun Nuoshing and the little angel paused for a moment, then turned their heads with their eyes wide open. They saw that the storm that was chasing them on the horizon had suddenly disappeared, as if the sky had suddenly become clear. At the limit of their vision, they could still see the grayish-white and black giant towers, which were not very far away. It was as if they had only been walking on the spot for the past 2 or 3 days, and had not walked far away. It was also as if they had just woken up from a dream, and then they saw a giant golden sun rising from the horizon with a rumble. The giant golden sun was releasing an incomparably warm light. The golden light seemed to want to melt the planet and swallow Yun Nuoshing and the others. However, if it was just light and a star, it would not cause any harm to them. Even if they fell into the sun, it would just be like soaking in a hot spring. However, the scene before they fell into the water was extremely shocking and brilliant. What's going to happen this time? The little angel walked behind Yun Nuoshing and wrapped her wings in front of him. This was a vigilant movement. The world did not play by the rules again. Although this was only the case for the past 2 or 3 days, it probably meant that something was going to happen again. The sun that was supposed to set suddenly appeared in front of them. To be more precise, the satellite suddenly turned in a circle and exposed the side that was not illuminated by the sun. Their buttocks were burning with pain. Well, that was what it meant. "Ask me." Yun Nuoshing blew out a breath of air in front of him. His divine power expanded in front of him along with the elements of nirvana, forming a circular energy barrier that was 1,000 feet wide, enveloping the entire land. Who am I supposed to ask? However, they could still see what was happening in front of them clearly. They were falling at this moment. Logically speaking, they should have floated up and fallen towards the wreckage of the sun as if they were falling from the sky. However, it was a very strange thing. No, since the world did not play by the rules, there was nothing strange about it. The satellite was falling towards the sun that was smaller than it was. In the end, no one knew whether it would swallow the wreckage or the wreckage would swallow it. Anyway, something is going to happen. I just don't know if it's a good thing or... Before Yun Nuashing could finish, the land suddenly trembled. Then, the entire satellite accelerated and fell downwards. The sight left Yun Nuashing and the little angel stunned. It was all too familiar. It happened when they stood on the shadow continent, and now it was happening again. While the two people were stunned, the satellite of Vesuvius was falling towards Vesuvius in a straight line at an unimaginable speed. It was like a person who had given up on struggling and plunged into magma, and just like that they plunged in. The golden corona rapidly enlarged before their eyes. Yun Nuashing could feel the hot wind rushing towards them. Particles of light streaked past them. The light from countless years ago shone on him, causing him to squint slightly. In his line of sight, there was something wrong with the Vesuvius. Under the golden corona, there was a black hole faintly discernible. However, the layer of corona was very thick and was tainted with the power of the divine destroyer of the satellite. It was a little abnormal and difficult to see through. It was like an illusion at a glance. This state did not last long. They watched as the golden light in front of them became brighter and brighter. Finally, they felt as if they had entered water and passed through the star corona. In their minds there was the sound of falling into water. What entered their eyes was not a golden ocean. There was nothing strange. There was only darkness. This is really beyond my expectations. The little angel could not help but exclaim. They could not see the golden border in front of them. However, they could see a circular layer of gold behind them. It was like a surging flame. It was the sun of Vesuvius. Yun Nuashing shrugged, indicating that he was used to it. After all, he had lived for a long time and had seen many things. Such bizarre things were nothing to him. He had seen many of them. Although it was really magical. In front of them was an unknown darkness. It was as if they had rushed into the void. However, there was no smell of the void. It was not a land of nothingness either. It was just darkness, endless darkness. The shrinking golden circle behind them told them that they were going deeper into the darkness. He looked down and saw that the satellite of Vesuvius had disappeared. Only the 100 feet of land that was shrouded by his aura was left. Fortunately, there was still a place to stand. Yun Nuashing sat down cross-legged and placed Qing Lei on the ground beside him. He took out a soft pillow from his pendant and placed it on her. Then, he started to wait in boredom. Say, where do you think we'll go this time? Where? It repeated and shook its head. I don't know. But I hate this dark place. I thought you would feel a sense of familiarity. Yun Nuashing smiled and raised his eyebrows at it. Isn't your world dark too? There's nothing. The little angel bent its knees and sat back to back with Hao Ren. It hugged its knees and said, So, I hate it. After I came out and saw the reality, I hated it even more. It's dark, empty, and there's nothing. I'm the only one in the whole world. Yun Nuashing patted its head. You don't want to go back after seeing the prosperity of the reality? Yes. It admitted generously. It was probably the instinct of life to pursue beautiful things. Even a strange life like it was no exception. Yun Nuashing leaned back and stretched out his legs. He looked at the dark place in a daze. Gradually, he fell into a state of thinking about life again. He quickly woke up and casually found a topic to talk about. How long do you think it will take this time? There was no sound behind him. Yun Nuoshing was stunned for a moment. However, the back he leaned against was still warm. There was also a faint breathing sound, which meant that it was still here. It just didn't know why there was no sound. Maybe it was also in deep thought. Looking at the dark space, it seemed like it had returned to its hometown. It was rare for a wanderer to come back. What was it thinking about? What are you thinking about? After a long time, Yun Nuoshing finally couldn't help but speak again. This time, he reached out his hand and touched the pair of wings hanging by the side. This woke up the little angel, who was thinking about life. Are you in a daze? Yun Nuoshing heard the movement and asked again. He was stunned for a moment. He looked around and said, "Can't you hear those sounds?" Yun Nuoshing was shocked. His whole body trembled. Why did it sound like a ghost story? Sounds? What sounds? In this space, in the middle of this darkness, there are many, many sounds. He stretched out his slender finger and pointed at the dark and empty space. He said, "There are many, many mixed sounds. I see many things and hear many things. What sounds did you eavesdrop on this time?" Yun Nuoshing was a little surprised. "I didn't hear anything." The little angel shook his head. "I have such an ability. It's just that you don't like me listening to your thoughts, so I won't eavesdrop on your thoughts. It's just that you let me hear it when you're in my domain." Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly and shook his head helplessly. "Then what did you hear?" "Sounds, just sounds." He was a little dissatisfied with the answer. He shook his head and thought for a moment. Then, he said, "It's like sleep talking." Dream. Yun Nuoshing chewed on the word carefully. He was also deep in thought. Originally, he thought that this world was very similar to a dream. It was like the things that happened in a dream. It was like a crowded but peaceful world. All these changes were too strange. Everything happened too deliberately. Therefore, he felt that this was like a dream, but it was also a real world. This was not their dream. It was someone else's dream. They were travelers who accidentally barged into its dream. As for what the owner of this dream was thinking and what he intended to do, now was the time to find out what it wanted to do. In a dream, there are times when one is awake. He suddenly murmured. The little angel had already woken up from the indulgence of eavesdropping. Naturally, he heard his voice. He turned his head in confusion. Think about what you have seen before. Think about what we have encountered. In the beginning, in that world, it was a very clear world. Everything was carefully arranged. There were hundreds of races, a big world, recorded history, and endless legends. These were all very carefully arranged. Then, we went to the Shadow Continent and went to the side of Wei Su's broken sun. What we saw gradually went against the balance. The balanced world began to fall apart, and chaos began to appear. Then, we have entered here. As he listened to him, his heart trembled. Suddenly, he had a feeling. Do you think we are going deeper or deeper? I think it should be the shallow. But then, there is no way to explain this dark and empty place. So, we can only be going deeper. But the truth is not up to us. It is up to it. Yun Nuoshing shrugged. They should be going from one place to another in the dream. Of course, this statement was based on the premise that his previous guess was correct. This is an invitation ticket, a ticket to a certain place. Oh no, we have already boarded the ship. Yun Nuoshing slowly stood up. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the front of the dark space. He seemed to have seen something passing by. It seemed that he had noticed something. Perhaps it was a subconscious reaction that he had noticed something. Or perhaps it was something else. Anyway, let's go. Chapter 1241. This answer did not exceed Yun Nuoshing's expectations. Ever since he knew that the Altar of Origin had crashed into the Yongdan realm and heard that the Yongdan realm had been abandoned, He felt that something was wrong with the overly beautiful world he encountered when he entered it. However, at that time, he did not really think that the world had anything to do with the altar. It was not until he saw the carving on the shadow continent that he confirmed this point. Originally, he just thought that the world that was deliberately carved had some special purpose. He did not expect that it was a world used to store the altar. The specifications were really high, using an entire world to store one thing. "I'm sorry to cause you some trouble. Although I'm guarding the altar, I don't have much combat power. The altar itself has no defensive power. I have no choice but to ask for your help." The little girl glanced at Yun Nuoshing and smiled slightly. "That altar? What is it used for?" Yun Nuoshing could not help but ask. He had been thinking about this thing for some time, but it was just pure curiosity. He was curious about the reason why the neurotic old ghost was so confident. He was curious about this thing that appeared in front of him in this era. As for what he coveted, he did not know what this thing that was floating in the void and void was. What could he covet? All this time, the only thing that drove him to look for this altar was his curiosity that could not be hidden in his heart. Other than that, he did not have any other thoughts. Of course, it was not entirely right to say that. He still held on to a glimmer of hope brought back from the distant future. After all, the old ghost's words had touched his heart a little. If this altar could really help him in some way, it was not impossible for him to fight for it. He did not know if this little sister, who claimed to be the guardian of the altar, was easy to talk to. What did she mean when she said, "It's not impossible for me to fight for it"? Altar. The little girl with long grayish-blue hair whispered softly and said, "The altar is just an altar. The important thing is the thing that is enshrined on the altar. That is the thing that I really protect." "So what exactly is it?" Hui waved his hand and urged slightly. The little girl looked at them deeply, but hesitated and frowned. "I don't know how to say it. This is the biggest secret of the birth of this world. I can't tell if you can know this secret." Hui opened his mouth and let out a strange cry. He had an expression that said, "Are you kidding me?" Just as he was about to stand up and say something, Yun Nuoshing quickly pulled him back and shook her head. Only then did he slowly sit down and look at the person sitting opposite him with a strange gaze. In fact, he didn't know whether that person was human or not. The little girl shook her head and said, "Please do not be agitated. The object consecrated on the altar is not what you think it is, wandering the void to find someone or something. In truth, the object of consecration exists only because it exists. This world is the one created by the altar. It is used to store the altar and its offerings. It wanders in the void and wanders in the land of nothingness. Its essence is that it does not wish for too many lives to come into contact with it. It is not what you think it is looking for. What if something accidentally comes in, like us, like that big guy just now?" Hui pointed outside with his finger and said. The little girl looked at them expressionlessly. A drop of sweat seeped out of her forehead and her eyes were stiff. Yun Nuoshing looked at the little girl, who looked very calm on the surface but was panicking on the inside. For some reason, she wanted to laugh, especially when she saw the little girl turn her eyes away after a few seconds. She couldn't help but want to laugh out loud. "Hey, don't ignore us," Hui said in a low voice with a bitter smile. Yun Nuoshing patted him on the shoulder and looked at the little girl, who was clearly panicking, with a faint smile. He laughed softly and said, "If that's the case, the object that the altar enshrines is related to the creation of the world. In your consciousness world, you once said that the altar of origins came from the creation of the world, or even before that. That was a world created by the consciousness of this world. It definitely has something to do with you. That period that the lower consciousness world refers to, can you change it to?" Yun Nuoshing twirled her finger and suddenly laughed in a low voice with echoes. The creation of the world at the beginning of the Deyuan realm. The little girl was sweating all over. She kept wiping the sweat off her face with her sleeves and didn't dare to look at them. She was a little girl who lived on the edge of the world of order and the world of non-order. She didn't have any intersection with any space, or some kind of consciousness existence. Although she might have lived for a long time, she was far less experienced than Yun Nuoxing and the others. A few words and some details were enough for them to see a lot of things. You just said that you can't tell, right? Hui crossed his legs and put his hands on his knees. He lowered his head and let his short bangs hang down. The gloomy smile on his face made him look like a living villain. Then, what is your judgment mechanism, Miss Guardian of the Altar? Well, the little girl showed a bitter smile on her face. She looked a little uneasy and a little embarrassed. Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes and suddenly said, "Actually, I've seen you before, ah?" The little girl was stunned. She shook her head without thinking. "I've never seen you before. Since the birth of this world, you and that chaotic life form are the first batch of life forms to visit this place. The altar is wandering on the edge of the world. It has also sensed the vision of some life forms that stopped here for a very short period of time. It was just a glimpse. No life has really come close to it. It's that glimpse that left some legends in our world. The mysterious altar wandering in the void, or something like that." Yun Nuoxing smiled and said, "Oh right. When I said that I've seen you before, I meant that I've seen that altar. In the void I had a glimpse. I also saw the thing that was enshrined on the top of the altar. It looked like this." He quickly drew out a long and thin thing with his hand. His movements were very fast and blurry. It was the thing that Yuan Shi had speculated to be placed on the two wooden sticks. The thing that the nightmare had jokingly called bread. To be exact, it was actually the dead man who saw it. He just saw what he saw. Seeing that his gestures were really similar, the little girl was shocked. Her face was full of sweat. The shape of his gestures was really similar to that thing. "You really saw it? You saw it so clearly? A glimpse, you know. That long thing, what is it?" Yun Nuoxing smiled. The little angel could not help but roll her eyes. That was obviously someone else's memory, but she would not say it now. We thought about it and associated it with the fact that this guy would either lie still and sleep or go out for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Suddenly, his doubts were cleared. God knows when he had seen it. Anyway, this old friend of his should be telling the truth. He should have seen that thing at some point. The little girl looked at him, a little confused. Suddenly, she let out a long sigh, shook her head and said, "Actually, I don't know what is enshrined on the altar." Yun Nuoxing opened his mouth and his jaw almost hit the floor. He really wanted to say, "Are you kidding me?" But he also wanted to see if she was joking. Unfortunately, this guy who lived on the edge of the world and the void did not seem to know how to lie except for being a little silly. No one should have taught her how to lie. This made him a little confused. The guardian of the altar did not know what it was that it was protecting. This was a little funny. The altar was a little uneasy. It was thinking, trying to come up with a conclusion, trying to guide the world. But it was very rigid and slow. We wandered in nothingness, wandering in the gaps of time. The movement of time is completely different from yours. Before it could come up with a conclusion, the non-sentient fellow had invaded this world. Perhaps because of its lack of sentience we could not sense it and could not react. It had already barged in like a pure destroyer, causing destruction in this empty world that only had starlight. It even wanted to use its energy to erode this world. But in the end, it did not succeed, as I used the power of this world to resist it. But before it was destroyed not long ago, it did not give up on devouring this world. This world was also badly damaged, and may have to stand guard here for a long time, perhaps. Perhaps. She was deep in thought, weighing something. But she quickly changed the topic. Although we are wandering in the edge of this world, we know this void very well. Why did I not know that this void gave birth to this strange life? It can't even be called life. This energy is from a certain— well, the person who created it said before that it is a certain kind of energy extracted from a very powerful life form, known as the sacred spirit. By the way, the sacred spirit here is not an ordinary sacred spirit. It may be a primeval heavenly deity. That kind of distorted energy that destroys the balance is called the abyssal death mist for the time being. It has wiped out the entire lower plane, and half of the middle plane has fallen. Now, all the lives in the upper plane and the surviving middle plane have joined forces to fight against it. You can say that the entire world of order is fighting to save itself. Yun Nuoshing did not have time to tell Hui about this. At this moment, Hui's face was also filled with horror. The abyssal death mist was an energy extracted from a powerful primeval heavenly deity. It was terrifying no matter how he heard it. The little girl pondered for a moment and said, "You called that energy the power of divine destruction, and said that the energy in my body is the same kind. What's going on?" Yun Nuoshing shrugged. "I didn't say that. It was the group who created the abyssal death mist." "Oh, that group is a race for the time being. They live in a place called the underworld. They said that it was the power of divine destruction, and the abyssal death mist is the mist of divine destruction. My power and your power are a little similar to the abyssal death mist, so we can consider it as a kind of divine destruction power. It was also because we found traces of the divine destruction power in that lower world that we thought that there was something wrong with that world. A strange creation born from the destruction of balance. However, it could not be punished by the correct rules. Its existence itself is wrong and chaotic, but it has been recognized by the rules of the void. It is not a wrong product born from a loophole." The little girl murmured. Then, she looked up and sighed. Since the passing of the heavenly gods of origin, this void has really become a lot stranger. Yun Nuoshing and Hui could not help but sit up straight when they heard those words. Their faces were solemn. The former could not help but ask, "You know the heavenly gods of origin and the others?" "Not really." She smiled and shook her head. "We just looked at each other from an extremely far distance in the void. The gods who represent the rules of this void, the guardians of this void, are so powerful and have such distinct characteristics. I can recognize them even if they don't say it." Hui hurriedly said, "You said that this void has changed a lot after they passed away. What was this void like when the heavenly gods of origin and the others were still around?" "Well," the little girl looked a little conflicted. She furrowed her beautiful brows. "I can't really say. It's just that there are some changes in the dark. Some things that can't be seen or touched are slowly changing. That time, the storm of divine destruction and the void shock disturbed this void. Many things have changed." Yun Nuoshing and Hui's expression changed slightly. The void shock was probably the void shock 11 years ago. After that shock, the entire void changed, becoming a little strange and uncoordinated. The great samsara of this era, the void shock, was not an unfathomable secret. About 5% of the people knew about it, which meant that only a portion of the heavenly gods knew about it. Logically speaking, those who lived in this void should not be able to sense anything wrong with the void. Otherwise, they would not be able to live in the same environment. Logically speaking, the heavenly gods would not be able to sense anything wrong with the void. However, the heavenly gods were an exception. This was especially true for the heavenly god of origin, who had transcended the constraints and could sense the void's problems more clearly. He could directly face the void's environment, which was the void shock. Therefore, the heavenly god of origin could sense that something was wrong. Undercurrents were surging and hidden injuries were everywhere. The two of them combined all these things and traced them back to the void shock 11 years ago, which was the end of the 39th era. Near the 40th era, the heavenly god of origin was the cause of the void shock. Based on these signs, they speculated that the void shock had not truly ended. The power of the storm of divine destruction had not completely poured out. In other words, there would be another void shock in the future, and it would happen at the end of the 59th era. Yes, Yun Nuoxing knew about the void shock at the end of the 59th era, but Hui didn't. He didn't know that his old friend came from the future and didn't know that he already knew. He still retained his understanding of the result that he had speculated with Feng. In other words, the void shock could happen 5 or 6 eras later. It could happen in the future, and it could happen after a dozen eras. It was something that happened in the void on its own. It was caused by the changes in the void, and it was the result of the void's self-activity. That's right. The effects left behind by the storm of divine destruction were the result of the storm of divine destruction after the deaths of the first great heavenly god and the others. It was like a hidden injury in the human body, which would flare up from time to time and cause unbearable pain. To put it bluntly, the birth of the void shock and the great samsara were all caused by the first great heavenly god and the other's death. That storm of divine destruction took away a lot of things and changed a lot of things. Its effect on the void was to leave behind a scar that would never be healed. These are also part of the effects caused by their deaths. It's only a part that you can sense, but it's already a rather important part. Perhaps, for the world of order, this is the most important part. That impact from the void will return the entire void to a state of zero. Nothing happened, nothing was born. It might happen in the next tens of thousands of years, or it might happen after a few eras. It might even continue to brew and not happen. The little girl stood up and bowed to Yun Nuoxing and the others. She said, "Follow me." Just now, the altar has already made its choice. After she finished speaking, she walked toward the passage that Yun Nuoxing and the others had come from. The 3 people looked at each other and hurriedly followed her. They were also very curious about the meaning of making a choice. "Hey, what do you mean by making a choice?" Hui couldn't help but ask as he hurried after them. The little girl didn't even turn her head. She said indifferently, "This world has been severely damaged. It can no longer be hidden for a short period of time. Now, the remaining shadow power in this world, the abyss death fog, is fading away like the ebbing tide. However, they have also destroyed a lot of things. It will no longer be safe to store that thing in this world. This world can no longer preserve that thing because of the loophole that appeared." Speaking of this, she turned her head and looked up at Yun Nuoxing with her grayish-blue eyes. She said, "You, who also possess the power of divine destruction, perhaps you can protect that thing well." Yun Nuoxing suddenly understood. To put it bluntly, this box had become tattered. Now they had to use another box to protect it. No wonder she said, "It's not impossible," at that time. "However, little girl, you have to know that I died once 8 eras later. I may not be able to protect that thing for you. Now that the underworld is very rampant, who knows when it will die?" He wanted to say it, but he forced himself not to. If he said it out loud, it might really be a disaster. Even if it wasn't a disaster, it might just brush past the truth. He was indeed very interested in the thing that existed on the altar. "After talking for so long, I still don't know where the altar is. Speaking of which, we clearly saw an altar smashed into that world. Why did we find another world here?" We asked. "The appearance of the altar is just the shell of this world. It was formed by the energy that leaked out from the altar itself. It doesn't have any special meaning," the little girl said softly. "As for the altar, its main body is right under our feet." Hui was stunned for a moment. At this moment they were already outside. The dim blue star was burning fiercely under their feet. The tongues of fire were reaching up to touch them. At this moment, the dim big star was rolling over and over. The internal sea of fire seemed to be a little abnormal. Yun Nuoxing noticed that the star was crazily shrinking. It shrank in circles as if it was about to collapse. It was like a huge liquid ball. After shrinking to a certain extent, it seemed to be pinched by a big hand from outer space, squeezing it into a big and small ball. Hui was worried that the liquid ball would be crushed. The sun seemed to be remodeled by someone on the spot. As it was compressed, it gradually changed into another appearance. It was the appearance of an altar. It was exactly the same as the altar that Yun Nuoxing saw in the old ghost's memory. Even the corners were the same. It seemed that the old ghost's memory was not bad. He could still remember the details when he was about to enter the reincarnation road. It was a black altar decorated with faint purple patterns, just like the color of the void. There was only a long grayish-blue staircase leading from the bottom to the top of the altar. It was ancient and filled with vicissitudes of life, exuding a majestic aura. They could vaguely hear the ancient sounds of worship, as if countless creatures were worshipping here day and night. That sound penetrated through time, reaching their ears from the distant past. A special sense of reverence unconsciously welled up in their hearts. It's no different from what I saw. I thought that the real altar would be more peculiar, said Yun Nuoxing. The little girl shook her head and said, There's no difference. The altar is the altar. The appearance of that world is the same as this one. Purple and black blended together, representing the color of the void. Apart from that, there's nothing else. She shook her head, waved her hand, and took the lead to rush down to the altar below. Yun Nuoxing and the others looked at each other and followed closely behind. They secretly looked at the top of the altar. It was blurry. With their eyesight, they should be able to see everything clearly from this distance. However, there were things that they couldn't see clearly. It was probably some protective measure of the altar. No wonder the guardian of the altar was so shocked when he said that he had seen that thing. When they landed on the top of the altar, Yun Nuoxing vaguely felt as if they had entered a layer of water membrane. He felt a slight chill in his body. He could feel the different nature of the space inside and outside. He suddenly had a feeling. Perhaps this was the place that was truly protected by this world. The three of them casually looked at this place. It was very spacious. After all, it was a star that had shrunk to half its size. There was nothing special about it. The only thing worth paying attention to was perhaps the only thing stored in this isolated space. The little girl was standing there, seemingly waiting for them to come over. Yun Nuoxing and the others slowly walked to her side. However, they saw that the side of the little girl's face was a little sweaty. They couldn't help but be stunned. They looked at the place in front of them. There was a rectangular altar placed at the top of the altar. There was a wooden stick at the two furthest ends. There was a fork at the top of the wooden stick. A skewer of meat was placed at the top, and a fire was lit at the bottom. It looked like, they digressed. There should be something placed on the two wooden sticks. What's wrong? Aren't you going to take it out? Yun Nuoxing asked casually. The little girl wiped the sweat on her forehead with her sleeve. She raised her head and looked at Yun Nuoxing with a frightened face. It's gone, huh? Hui Gui shouted. What did you say? She pointed at the wooden stick in front of her with a trembling hand and said, The thing that was enshrined on the altar. It's right there, but it's gone. Yun Nuoxing and Hui Gui's expressions were so stiff that they seemed to have been frozen in the cold wind of the southern ice realm for hundreds of billions of years. Only the little angel could still smile. He clapped his hands while laughing. Wonderful, wonderful. Another wasted trip. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.